Good morning. We're running a little bit behind this morning, but it's so good to be in Central Oregon, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful morning. Chilly, but very beautiful, and the drive over was gorgeous. Thank you so much to our Central Oregon Community College partners for welcoming us here today. We're really happy to be here. I am gonna hand the microphone over to your fearless leadership team. And a little bit of housekeeping. Restrooms are right out this door, just adjacent down the hall. We have coffee and refreshments over here. Please help yourselves. We'll have some lunches delivered before the break so that you can have a working lunch before we get to participate in a tour here on campus. And I think that's it. I'm gonna hand the microphone over to Joan.
Buenos dias. Doesn't sound like, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, I drove over this morning and I am not from Oregon. I've been here 20 something years. And it's amazing seeing the sunrise. And the reminder how fortunate we are, to be here. So congratulate everybody who came last night. Congratulations to everybody who's here. Those who are online, thank you for, keeping tabs on us and being connected to this work. Super excited for this quarterly meeting as we have some great things to look forward today. I'm specifically looking forward to the focus groups conversation. And I think we will go through a charter review, so that should be fun. And it's always good to see this much talent and engaged individuals in one room, speaking to the future of manufacturing, which starts here with us. Say hi.
Good morning, everybody. I'm David Provost at OSU, and just let me add my thanks to Central Oregon Community College for hosting us. They're a great partner with us at OSU, and it's nice to be back over here. I did the drive this morning. It's gorgeous. Do it often. It's one of my favorites to do. So good to see everybody this morning. I think should we go around? Well, everybody, is that helpful? Yeah. Okay, so let's start with that.
Hi, I'm Nick Brenton-Walt, Manufacturing Industry Consortium strategist, and I promise I'm not reading it off my card screen. I'm pulling the title, but really excited to be here and be working with this consortium in particular. So.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Central Oregon Community College. I'm an instructional outreach team, so I oversee the Redmond campus, Prineville and Madras. I also oversee the manufacturing program. Just started that this summer, so I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm Martha Chapman. I'm a Regional Development Officer at Business Oregon.
I'm Janelle Ives, and I serve as Oregon's Career Technical Education State Director, and I'm at the Oregon Department of Education.
And I'm Ken Madden. I own Madden Industrial Craftsman, an industrial staffing company, and Madden Fabrication, a steel fabrication facility and headquartered in the Portland area. In addition, I serve on the Workforce Talent Development Board for the state of Oregon as well. And it's the first time I've been in this meeting in person, so I appreciate that. A lot of new faces, even though I served on the board of PCC for a while, and some of the other connections I've heard about. So it's nice to finally put a face to them. But again, thank you for having me today. I would normally joining virtually, so you hold it in Bend, I'm gonna be here.
Yeah. Hold it in Portland, not so much. Good morning, everybody. Kim Parker-Jadenas. I'm the Executive Director of Willamette Workforce Partnership. So don't pay attention to this. We're going to get that fixed. I was the chair of the Oregon Workforce Partnership. So I think that's some of the confusion. And the Oregon Workforce Partnership is the association of the 9 local workforce development boards. So I'm here representing them.
We have another one over here. Hi, I'm Carly Petrovic. I'm the head of human resources for Microchip Technologies Oregon region, and we have a manufacturing fab based in Gresham, Oregon. Glad to be here.
Hello, I'm Kristen Lima. I'm Dean of Applied Technologies, Business and Information Systems at Mount Hood Community College.
Good morning, and I'm Denise Dwyer with Portland Community College, and I'm the director at the Willow Creek Opportunity Center, and we have a manufacturing focus.
I'm Paul Sheldon. I'm sitting in for Abigail Lewis today from Golden Rule Reentry. We're a trauma-informed organization that helps formerly incarcerated people get reintegrated into community, and we have a manufacturing training program.
Thanks. I, like Kim Parker, am a local workforce board director. Welcome to our region. So it's a third of the state, so it's hard to miss. I'm Heather Ficht, and I'm the director of East Cascades Works.
Good morning, my name is Brandy Danston. I'm the apprenticeship manager here at CUCC.
Good morning, I'm Amy Ward. I am the Redmond campus director. It's wonderful to have you all here. We ordered this weather just for you. And I am also the interim manufacturing technology program director.
That's okay, it ends with you, but that microphone is.
Power.
It's off.
Before we move along, I just, I'm gonna switch. There we go. That's so much better. I didn't introduce myself. Jennifer Purcell, I'm the director for Future Ready Oregon at the HEC. And what I should have started with is it's so important for us to be in community, and having the opportunity to engage with you all in Central Oregon is really a privilege. And in an effort to expand that community engagement, and some of the work you're going to hear about today is an extension of our ability as a consortium to learn from others across the state. It's exciting to be here. We had the opportunity last week to have our first on the road consortium meeting. The healthcare consortium met in Medford, which is very much similar letters to Redmond, so I keep getting them mixed up. We were in Medford, Rogue Community College, where we learned about some of their health sciences programs. And part of what I just want to acknowledge is that we do have consortium members at the table. Also really excited to have community members at the table. It really enriches the conversation that we have today and the learning that we do as a consortium. So thank you all for joining at the table and participating in the conversation. Ronan is masterfully going to be watching the chat for us today. We do have a number of consortium members who weren't able to make the trip but are listening in online. And if we are able to meet our quorum, we will move forward with a couple of action items today. I think I'm responsible for walking through the agenda, aren't I? I told Nick I wouldn't put him in charge of anything today because it's his second day on the job. So have some patience with both of us. For the agenda today, Ronan, maybe you could go to the next slide. We have already had the opportunity to introduce ourselves. We're going to move into the consent agenda. You should all have copies of the June 18th meeting minutes in your packets. And if we have a quorum, we will move forward with that. I'll check in with Ronan momentarily. We do have a time on the agenda for public comment, and then we will be reviewing some revisions to our charter. So members, you do have a copy of the charter in your packets. It is a red line copy, so we can draw your attention to some of the specific changes. I know Jonathan mentioned it, very excited to hear from Jensen Strategies today and the early summary findings from the employer focus groups they conducted across the state. And then we have the opportunity to hear from some of our community partners. You've met Amy and Heather, who will join us on the panel shortly, and they'll be joined by Josh Lagallo from Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. We'll take a quick break to grab lunches, and then Ronan's going to be walking us through, typo, House Bill 3306 is a bill that passed a couple of years ago that amended some of the responsibilities of the consortium. So we're going to be walking through that today, and the early work that Ronan and team have been doing. And then having a conversation about how do we move into 2025? Looking through our medium-term objectives and what we have learned today and what we might carry forward with us. Jonas and Ed, anything else that you want to say before we jump into the business of the day? All right. Then with that, Ronan, any additional voting members? No, okay, so we're gonna hold off on approving the meeting minutes. If we reach a quorum, we're close, very, very close. If we reach a quorum, we'll bring that back up in a little bit. So now is the time where we pause for public comment. We don't have anyone signed up for public comment, but are any of our community partners have anything they want to share? All right. So then we will move on to our charter revisions. If you all wouldn't mind grabbing your charter out of your packet. I want to draw your attention to some of the more substantive changes to the charter. I'll note that your counterparts in healthcare and technology have both already amended their charters. And so these changes are reflective of some consistent updates to the charters. Primarily, the charters were originally written as we were launching the consortium, so they had a lot of rich foundational material in them. We left some things like decision-making process to be added later. We were silent on things like membership terms. And so this updated charter really reflects sort of a tightening of the work of the consortium. Now that you've been meeting for a year, more than a year, almost a year and a half. The updates here are really to reflect the permanency of this body as an advisory body to the Workforce and Talent Development Board and the HEC. And I'm gonna walk you through a couple of things that are more substantive. There's some name updates that you'll note. The commission's chair has changed since we launched, so we updated that with Sandy Rowe, who's the current chair of the commission. The background information, we just tightened this up, included some summary and redirected folks to the website rather than what previously was very detailed information about Senate Bill 1545, which is the statutory authority that established the industry consortium. You'll see that the committee organizers are listed here and your leadership team is listed here, representing education, industry, and community partners. Next slide, I don't have the slides in front of me. So some of the substantive updates include our structure for working groups, membership terms. We have embedded the equity statement and some of the group agreements that we walked through in our forming meetings, our formative meetings. There's some updates to the timeline and deliverables and the meeting schedule. And then you'll see a new decision-making and accountability section. So let's take a moment to look at the working groups, which is at the top of page 2. Ronan, next slide, please. Okay, so for working groups, you may remember that the initial charter listed some specific working groups. We broke out into those working groups at our kickoff meeting and started conversations around integrating education and training responses and equity and inclusion strategies in the manufacturing workforce and workforce development systems. What we've done in this update to the charter is given you all the authority to identify and operate working groups that your leadership team determines makes the most sense for meeting the needs and objectives of this consortium. So as opposed to having a set working group structure, the leadership team will be making some recommendations about what that working group structure would include. You also retain the ability to stand up and operate agile working groups as needed in response to emerging issues. So the example here would be the working group that worked on the funding recommendations for the most recent round of Workforce Ready grant funding. And in 2025, it's our intention that we stand up the working groups and begin that work of digging into some of the things that this consortium have identified as strategies they'd like to explore. Let's see, next slide, please. Membership terms. So I want to draw your attention to this section. This is new content. And the membership will be as follows. HEC staff will recommend membership to the leadership team for appointment or reappointment to 3-year terms. There will be no term limits. And our intention would be to apply staggered terms to the originating membership so that you don't all renew your membership at the same time. Membership in good standing requires attendance at a minimum of 3 meetings per year. So as a reminder, we meet quarterly. Our updated intention is that our winter meeting will be entirely virtual so that no one's having to worry about traveling. And then one of the other 3 meetings will be held in communities across the state, so that we're sure to be making sure that everyone has access to participation. This is an acknowledgement that an engaged membership is essential to equitable participation. And you'll note in here that we do identify that alternates are continuing to be part of the process. So a number of you have alternates or are alternates identified on the official membership list. The purpose of sending an alternate is to ensure that continuity of representation in extenuating circumstances. And that person should represent the voting member, not replace them. Members and their alternates are both invited to attend and participate in consortium meetings, but only voting members would participate in action items or alternates on their behalf.
Isn't it supposed to specify that alternates wear neckties?
No. No. All right. Next slide, please. So in the original charter, we made reference to HEC's equity statement. In this charter, we have actually included HEC's equity stance and identified that the consortium will work collaboratively and honor the diversity of members and their contributions as group agreements. And we may want to revisit a more established group agreement structure going forward. And then update to the timeline, you'll note the medium-term objectives, which we have walked through at the last couple of meetings. Continuing to inform and recommend policy and funding strategies for opportunities and gaps in the manufacturing sector, and then establishing a standing working group structure, which we just talked about, and then identifying some success measures, both for how performance measures in the manufacturing workforce system, and you've seen some of that, the structure that's built into Future Ready Oregon and the data that we're collecting through those grant-funded projects, learning from that and tracking success there. And then thinking about collective impact measures for the consortium itself. Those are things that we'll be doing in 2025. And then we have a list of staff and meeting schedule, which I already spoke about. And then I think maybe, one more slide. There we go. The last section that we added is the decision-making and accountability section. And this really articulates the consensus-based decision-making approach that you all walked through when you were affirming your funding priority recommendations. That is, that the consortium will advance decisions by consensus, that if the leadership team concludes that unanimous consensus isn't possible, decisions can be advanced by a majority vote. A quorum will be required to be present for either consensus process or majority vote. And a quorum will be achieved when a simple majority of the voting membership is present in person or virtually. I'm gonna pause there to see if there are any questions about the charter revisions.
We have one from a member online. If a member falls out of good standing, how does this affect their participation? Are they immediately removed from the group or can they not be reappointed? What is the consequence? We should be explicit in the charter about this.
Thank you. I'm gonna run a microphone over to you next time you report out, but I think I can repeat that back. So there is a question about how we will address membership when a member falls out of good standing or is considered not engaged by the definition in the charter. I don't think that we have addressed that, and so I would be looking for a suggestion that the consortium can discuss and react to.
It would seem like really the main so just kind of reflecting back on what we were just discussing, it seems like one of the main criteria that might get someone removed is if they missed too many meetings, right? So maybe you could kind of gather our thoughts around that. So just thinking out loud here, like maybe if they've fallen out of compliance with the meeting attendance, they get, one more chance, so to speak. I mean, we could maybe put them on some sort of probationary status, well, that seems a little, extreme for, for this, but just something like that. I was thinking, just trying to think about what would be the main reasons that someone might fall out of good standing. So maybe they get another chance, and then if they continue to not meet the attendance requirements, they might be asked to step out.
Or possibly identify an alternate that could either replace or supplement their attendance. Other thoughts?
On other boards, sometimes we've addressed this by saying uncommunicated absences rather than just absences. So if someone's unable to attend and they communicate, so they're not placed in not good standing just for not having been able to attend because of a personal emergency or whatever.
You could also include that it was consecutive meetings. Sometimes you don't anticipate that it's going to be, you've gone to 3 or not, and then you missed 2 in a row or something.
Well, I can price unless you need it for the. On the state workforce board, we typically had the chair had the ability to replace somebody if it was a chronic attendance. So I think at the will of the chair or executive director, that person made the decision of being able to replace somebody if they weren't showing up on a regular basis.
That's a great note, Ken. I don't even know if this is working, but I'm gonna pretend. And it is a great note as advisory to the Workforce and Talent Development Board. It does make sense that we would mirror some of those policies. So we could indicate that multiple consecutive uncommunicated absences will be considered by the leadership team. It could be at the discretion of the leadership team to consider participation, ongoing participation. Okay, so the addition to the membership terms section would be in the event of multiple uncommunicated absences, the executive leadership team will consider ongoing participation or membership. Are there other questions, comments, musings? Roman, nothing else online, and do we have any additional voting members? No, okay. So we're gonna go ahead and make this addition to the charter. If we reach quorum during the meeting today, we'll bring this back for vote. Otherwise, we will advance it for vote at our next meeting. Thank you all. Good discussion, good addition. All right, we are moving a little ahead of schedule, which is great because I'm very excited for the next agenda item. And Ronan, I think next slide, please. One more, there you go. We are joined today by Amelia Wallace, Senior Associate for Jensen Strategies, which is the organization that has been conducting focus groups with employers in healthcare, manufacturing, and technology across the state of Oregon. Amelia is going to share some of the summary findings with you all with a focus on the focus groups that were around manufacturing. A little bit about timeline. Eric Jensen from Jensen Strategies presented last week at the Healthcare Consortium, and they'll present again later in October at the Technology Consortium, and then we expect to have the full summary report available. So we'll be sure to share that with you all and post that online so that it's available publicly. And what else was I going to say? This exercise is reflective of your voice, indicating that in addition to the employer and industry representatives that we have at the consortium table, there was a desire to continue to learn more and elevate the voice of employers in informing our work. And as part of that, and through our partnership with the folks at Oregon Solutions and the National Policy Consensus Center, we were connected with Jensen Strategies to do this work across the state for us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amelia. I am also going to run one of these microphones over to Ronan so that members online are able to participate in questions, comments. Otherwise, Amelia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that cue up. And I am very sad that I cannot be with you in person today, but I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share the results of some of the work that we've been undertaking over the last few months. I first want to start off by just giving a full resounding thank you to the HEC staff, Jennifer and Ronan in particular, for their support throughout this process. It's been a pleasure to work with this staff team and this organization. As you might guess, I have a lot to share, and I would like to leave time for questions at the end. So please note that these are highlights. We will be sharing more detail on our report, as Jennifer mentioned, which will be available later on. So with that, Ronan, if you want to go to the next slide.
And although you do have this slide deck in your packets if you want to follow along for note taking.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So a little bit about us. We are management consultants. We were formed in 2012, so we've been doing this work for a little while. We are Portland-based, but we work throughout the state of Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. We also have a public sector focus. So vast majority of our clients are all state and local government, which means we interface with employers, all different sectors that touch local government. But our expertise really is in public processes that are inclusive and evidence-based. We focus on 4 main services, just for context, in terms of the lens we bring to this. Those include collaborative decision-making, facilitation processes. That's what this largely falls into. We also do organizational development work, policy analysis, and executive recruitment. So we help hire city managers and other upper level government leaders. Next slide, please. So there you have at least the core team that was involved in this work, myself and my principal and founder, Eric Jensen. He served as the primary facilitator for the healthcare and technology focus groups, and I had the pleasure of leading the manufacturing-based ones. We were partners in crime for a majority of these, which actually worked out really well because we were able to see some observations actually across all of the consortia. As Jennifer mentioned, we'll be focusing on the manufacturing highlights today, but just know that will be coming in the report as well. And next slide. So one more, I have a couple, couple animations. So well situated within the mission and goals of HEC and Future Ready. Specifically, our task in this work was to inform the Manufacturing Consortium's discussion recommendations through a series of focus groups where we were seeking to obtain information and perspectives specifically from Oregon manufacturing employers, those with firsthand experience on their experience and needs related to workforce planning, recruitment, training, development, and retention. Don't worry, you'll see those topics throughout the rest of this presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So those focus groups, we held 4 in-person facilitated sessions around the state. You can see the little stars where we visited. So briefly, we started in Portland. Our next session was in Medford. We then held a session in Salem. And then we had planned one in Eastern Oregon and ended up shifting to additional one-on-one interviews to get more input from that region. So that's why that star is yellow. And I also, yeah, actually, next slide. Excellent. So a little bit more about who we spoke with. We had a really great diversity of employers and individuals participating in terms of their background, organization sizes, et cetera, from family businesses to startups. So mostly these folks were COOs or CEOs of their organization or HR professionals. So that was recruitment leaders, talent acquisition leaders, et cetera. All these folks had really great insight and experience in this work to share. As far as inviting folks, we did make a special effort to try to get some extra representation from some of the top types of manufacturers in Oregon. So that includes wood, metal, food and agricultural products, and semiconductor production. But then we wanted to make sure we got a little bit more diversity as well. So we also tried to seek regional specific producers, large and small company representation. That was something that came through strongly. And businesses that had different levels of reach. So local, state, and internationally reaching businesses. The results over those 5 total regions that we were engaging with folks, we engaged with 21 employer participants. We had up to 7 in the sessions. And we did have, I just want to note, we did have 2 of your own manufacturing consortia members participating as an employer in these groups. Just sharing that for transparency. All right, next slide, please. All right. So to prepare more for this work, the way we arrived at the specifics of our approach was we asked you. We took an opportunity to conduct some pre-assessment interviews with 6 consortia. Well, it was 4 interviews with 6 different members and other manufacturing industry leaders. Those were incredibly helpful to make sure that we were responsive to some of the key issues in this area. So Those interviews were foundational in terms of, as I mentioned, preliminary key issues, trying to understand, right, what the consortia's goals with this work would be, and importantly, seeking focus group participants. And I want to call that out just a little bit, that, the HEC staff, we worked very closely with them in terms of recruiting individuals, but we also engaged with a lot of partners. I can't see everybody, but I'm curious how many folks in the room today assisted with this effort and provided their time and expertise. So just want to thank everybody for their assistance in that area. Great. So next slide, our conversation. So based on the interviews, the mission of our work, and coordination with the HEC staff, we focused on the foundational focus areas. That's what we used to develop the questions that we walked our focus group participants through. So just briefly, demand planning, these are the specific questions that we kind of prompted the group with. So demand planning, we asked employers, in the context of workforce demand, what data do you use? How do you know what you need in your workforce, let alone how you get it? Next, skills, credentials, education, and training. What are the high value and recognized credentials? Are there clear pathways, particularly from entry to mid-level? And what are the perspectives that perspectives of employers about how we can integrate education and training better into their needs. And then importantly, a key focus of this work was identifying strategies that related to supporting equity inclusion in the workforce. So Future Ready defined a pretty wide range of priority populations. We attempted to make sure we were discussing directly in the conversation whenever possible, to kind of go back to say, how's it working for these folks? I'm going to look to the side here. I actually have the original facilitation chart we used to share these with the focus groups. So that included communities of color, women, low-income communities, rural and frontier communities, veterans, persons with disabilities, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals, members of Oregon's tribes, older adults, and individuals who identify as members of the LGBTQ+ community. And then we had a few sector-specific questions. Great. Moving on to the next slide. So that just demonstrates within the topics, we attempted to go back and identify specific strategies that related to the priority populations. Next slide. So to make sure that participants had context for this conversation, we didn't ask them to prepare anything in advance or anything like that, but we did provide a facilitated opening where we included agenda, goals of the focus group, of course. We provided them information about the Manufacturing Consortia and the member list, and of course, about Future Ready Oregon. All right, next slide. So overall, this was a really rewarding experience for us facilitating. And these insights that I'm about to share, just in terms of just kind of the environment of the conversations, actually spans across all the consortia. So participants pretty universally were grateful for the opportunity to participate. And specifically, as I heard talked about at the beginning of this consortium meeting, the opportunity to participate in person in their region. We had full and robust participation. I didn't have to pick on folks very much to make sure that everybody contributed. The input was really constructive. There are going to be big challenges named here, but overall, they recognize that this wasn't just the state's problem, or this wasn't just one source, right? But a complicated issue that they were interested in finding unique partnerships to tackle. One of the things I found most rewarding and exciting to see is the individual connections that happened during the focus groups. We had lots of people exchanging business cards after, a few different emails that went on saying, oh, you're working on that? Great, we should definitely stay in touch. So that was really rewarding to see. And overall, participants' desire to keep working with you all, to keep being involved in this conversation. So that was very encouraging as well. All right, are you ready to hear a little bit about what we heard? So you'll hear in the context of these findings, hopefully some ahas, some insight moments, but also some things that you'll probably think, yeah, and they'll things that you work with day in, day out. But it was really helpful from the participants' perspective and ours to not assume the problem or the solution. So these were really great open conversations. Just briefly, as I'm walking through, I'll provide a little overall context on just kind of the state of the field and the workforce from what we heard. Then I'll move into some of the kind of key insights and challenges that were brought up by the employers, topic by topic, along those demand planning, recruitment, training topics that I mentioned before. And then I'm going to go back through those topics again to pull out some of the opportunities that came up in those conversations. And I'm going to try to get through all of this in plenty of time to leave an opportunity for discussion at the end. So that said, please do feel free to ask any clarifying questions as we're going through. But as I said, I'll try to get through all the information so we can discuss at the end. All right. So at a high level, just some context for how to interpret what you hear today. What we're sharing is based on the perspectives that were shared with us during the session. So we did promise individuals, we'll share who we spoke to, but we won't say what they specifically said. That was an important condition in terms of making sure we were able to have robust, open, and candid conversations. The perspectives we'll share were shared by a majority of employers, but I want to clarify that this was an information gathering, not a consensus developing process. So there's a lot of agreement, and areas where there was differences of opinion are also highlighted. As I mentioned, this is a summary, more will be coming, and we held these regionally, but frankly, a majority of the findings actually apply statewide. So we'll be disaggregating that a little bit more, particularly in the report, but unless otherwise specified, you can kind of assume these are statewide relevant. Okay, next slide. So first of all, state of the workforce, just kind of overall. Employers recognize that traditional methods aren't working. It's not just them, it's not something specific to the industry, and that's related to a number of big factors. Generational change, and I want to say on both ends of the spectrum, mobility of the workforce. There's just greater ease of moving on rather than having a conversation. The pros and cons of increased online hiring, cost of living issues, other socioeconomic challenges. They also noted that there are good resources available, but there are barriers and definitely some areas of improvement, particularly with being able to take more advantage of the valuable assets that community colleges and other existing training programs provide. And as many of you, as I don't need to remind anyone, we had a little pandemic a while ago, and there were big impacts in this industry. The idea of being seen as essential workers in a lot of cases, the domestic importance of the industry really being highlighted, the impact of temporary policies, whether that was funding that was provided one time or other policies related to unemployment support and hiring bonuses. And then just overall long-term changes, and we'll come back to this later on in terms of just how the economy is working, what they can expect and plan on. Next slide. And Ronan, I'm assuming you'll interrupt me if there is anything in the chat or otherwise, but so great. So the state of the industry, kind of overall themes and dynamics that participants felt was really important to understand when trying to talk about not just workforce, but manufacturing workforce. So specifically, tight margins. That's true of all organizations to some degree, but particularly acute for these groups, particularly when thinking about trying to maintain being competitive. The industry also struggles with a historic negative perception. Thinking of the, just like the big, evil, dirty, not environmentally friendly company that really doesn't, there's a lot of nuance in there, but it's a historical perception that that they struggle with. And that some of those conditions are baked in. They're just a hazard of a requirement of producing the items that's needed. So requiring in-person work, potentially having inflexible schedules, physical demands, safety concerns, things like that, that can all be overcome, but can't necessarily just be changed. And as I touched on previously, just the impact of some of the greater national, international forces. So macroeconomic, political, domestic production needs, et cetera. Next slide. Thank you. So going back to that question of how do you know what you need in your workforce? Not surprisingly, most manufacturing employers have that pretty dialed in. They know in most cases, they have a pretty nuanced accounting of we need to produce this much. This is how many people and how much raw resources we need to do that. I won't read through the full list of data sources, but it's a combination of internal company information and contract information, et cetera. But beyond that, there's another wild card that I mentioned in terms of global and national economic trends, the impact of raw material shortages or supply chain gaps, et cetera, as well as changes due to legislative enactments. So whether that's the pay equity laws, 55-hour rule, paid leave, or meals and breaks, each one of those factors changes that equation for employers in terms of how many individuals that they need to meet their production goals. Next, please. So moving on to recruitment, kind of top takeaways. So not surprisingly, the challenges are different between whether you're talking about entry versus skilled labor. So essential skilled roles were cited as the most critical workforce needs, specifically technical focused roles as well as management, and particularly those that involve both. For the entry level, there was a lot of comments about how the volume has recovered of applications since COVID, but what they're struggling with is actually now a volume follow-through issue. So getting that quality out of applications. There was also talk about high expectations from employees in terms of the earning potential and advancement timeline. Again, not that they couldn't get there necessarily, but how quickly and what are the steps? And as far as recruitment, companies feel like they're trading. We had a joke in one focus group about having a punch card for how many employees each employer had traded in their time. And that's due to a lot of things, right? Some employees are feeling like they just have to chase that minimal hourly increase to meet their daily needs. And just kind of new workforce trends where there is a more normalized acceptance of moving around to companies and even in some cases a logic that will serve employees better than it has traditionally. And as far as sources, again, probably not surprising, companies feel they have to be creative when they are recruiting for a role that doesn't have a specific degree originating program that they can draw from. They're having to kind of think, where's the overlap? Where can I be more strategic in how we target? Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, a couple difficult positions to fill that came up frequently. Not surprising, I'm sure. Particularly some of the electrician, that was one that came up consistently. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And middle management. Key gap. All right, now next slide. Thank you, Ronan. So just briefly, this was, we got a lot of feedback on all the different things that employers are doing to find the workforce that they need. Couple starred really came up a lot. So specifically, online advertising, it's a necessary evil. I talked a lot about, I was surprised employee referral and word of mouth were some of the most effective and consistently named strategies across employers. And that was particularly impactful for recruiting and retaining priority population workforces. So that was great. And then temp agencies came up frequently, particularly in terms of the ability of employers to engage with an employee, get their immediate capacity met, but engage with an employee who's already gone through some basic screening, and that they can almost treat as an interview, right? Using that as a hiring pool in itself. Yeah. And Rona, will you advance the slide one more? There we go. So one thing I did want to note as well is that while of course there are softwares and programs that people use to manage their databases, I was interested that most reported still hand screening a majority of their applications. Then as far as kind of your more proactive recruitment and overall engagement, companies were very active in this space. So whether that was K through 12 school engagement, really focusing on what I mentioned earlier, which is that awareness, that early introduction of manufacturing careers as viable, interesting, meaningful careers. That's something that I'll try to, that came up a number of times, is just, high school is great, but sometimes it's baked in even by then. So employers are looking at earlier and even more targeted ways to engage with people earlier. Higher education, of course, partnering directly with institutions that are training workforce, offering apprenticeships, training and whatnot. But beyond that, also just general community engagement work. Anything to get the word out, get their name out in the community and continue building that positive reputation. We'll come back to being seen as an employer of choice a number of times in this presentation and in the report. All right, next slide. So then as far as education and training goes, this is kind of a scattershot list of some of the key topics that came up. So I'm just going to walk through them pretty quickly. So first of all, employers recognize it's a changing field. Even anyone who's working diligently to try to keep up is going to have trouble staying current, particularly when you're talking about academia and how long it can take some of those processes to adjust. Some of the key skills gaps that kept coming up were just kind of physical aptitude, ability to use their hands, problem solving, and this was across all positions. We'll touch on it just briefly, basic finance skills and people management. Barriers for employees pursuing education and training opportunities that do already exist. Not a lot of surprises here. Job, transportation, et cetera. One I want to call out that came up a number of times was the importance of job security. So whether that meant having a job, having the ability to have a job while you're going through your training program, or knowing that when you get to the end of your program, you'll have a job to go back to. And ideally, if you didn't like the new job you trained for, another place to go back to in your old role if needed. But just kind of reducing that, that fear of change. Next, availability. That was a real takeaway, is that you earn where you learn. So it matters not just having the programs in Oregon, but having access to those locally. They also noted a key barrier to offering that is obviously general resources, but specifically instructor shortages. That came up in a number of ways in terms of potential problems that projects or programs that were viewed as potentially successful that fell through because they couldn't find the right folks to teach them. And then finally, related to the kind of perception of the career of the industry, they feel they're limited by those who self-select into already saying, oh yeah, I'm interested in manufacturing. Therefore, I can be engaged on potential careers. They feel there's this whole universe of people who could be great fits and really successful that won't even get the pitch. Then finally, not surprisingly, employers want to engage more, but some barriers to that are, they've had some success developing individual relationships or some kind of informal relationships with training organizations, but there's turnover, right? It's hard to keep those up. And just a recognition of limited time and overall capacity, particularly in leadership, right? And some of the areas that it's most important to have engaged in these conversations. So all that's to say, there were some really inspiring, as I'm hoping we'll get into in the panel conversation, examples of regional and local partnerships and conversations that are happening. So some good bright spots, but obviously always more opportunities. Next slide. So just to break it down as clearly as we heard from the employers, entry-level labor, as far as education and training, employers know they're not going to have folks walking in who know how to operate their system, make their product perfectly. They're going to have an in-house training roles, but they need folks to come in with those basic professional skills, ability to communicate with their peers, with their supervisor, show up on time, operate in a professional environment. And Ronan, if you'll hit next. Thank you. So the need is more exposure to the field and basic employability coaching for entry-level workers. For skilled labor, as I mentioned, this was one of the more acute recruiting challenges. And some of those positions have a really high level of credentials and training requirements in order to be successful. Specifically, and I know this is one that has a lot of complicated layers to it, but the electrician journeyman requirement came up a number of times, as well as in and out of state reciprocity. More specifically on the skilled labor though, going back to that management, a really interesting finding that came up in a number of the conversation was this idea that not only are some of your best workers, not necessarily your best managers, but also your best, technical workers, not necessarily best people managers. But also more importantly, the key role that your middle management plays in terms of career advancement, in terms of identifying and supporting folks to be able to be successful in their roles and get to the next level. So Ronan, if you'll hit one more time. So maybe two, I think it was on 2 lines. There we go. So ways that a gap that the employers have is hoping to have a larger local qualified workforce to recruit from, and more opportunities to help their incumbent and new employees train up in management and leadership. Okay, next slide. So perfect segue to career pathways. So employers were pretty universal in terms of seeing the value and being able to clearly articulate a career pathway and advancement opportunity for incoming employees. Some have really robust materials in this area, but it's resource intensive to develop it. So particularly for startup companies, others, they want to do it, but they're not quite sure how to get there yet. Companies also are limited in terms of what they can provide in-house, what's sustainable, how they can offer that to what advancement opportunities they can offer to incumbent employees. And employee advancement is lumpy in a lot of cases. It's hard to apply and offer these opportunities on a truly equitable basis when, it can be self-selecting, the person who volunteers. et cetera. As far as non-degree path roles, we've talked about this, that's a particular area of murkiness when we talk about career pathways, just because there's not a specific degree, right, or credentialing that leads into that. So particularly some of these like technician roles that really do have some overlapping competencies, they look so different that it can not necessarily be clear to an employee, oh, I could work in this type of manufacturing company as well as this one with the same skills. And then finally, those that are degree-based for those advanced roles, not surprisingly, all the barriers that can be inherent in formal or secondary education can be more challenging for both folks who are already employed at the organization, who are beyond the kind of young student range, as well as certain priority populations. All right, next, retention. Last experience before we get into takeaways and opportunities. So with retention, as we've already kind of talked about, employees recognize that the same things that they used to do to keep their employees around they're not working the same way. Notice that turnover rates, particularly in some of your entry-level employees, that can be in the first days that it's a make or break decision, not just on the company, but in some cases, the whole industry, whether that employee sees a place for them. So they see that as a really interesting and critical point to narrow in on. But really, what I heard far and away is that employers are getting that it's about culture. Particularly when you have some of the challenging pieces that we talked about in terms of sometimes some limited pay potentials, in-person work demands, physical demands, other things, that it's not just more dollars that keep people around. It's a lot of the whole package of feeling supported by your employer, respected by your employer, et cetera. So this is I would say a pretty comprehensive, but actually not full list of all the different strategies that employers shared with us in terms of things they're doing to keep their employees around. Now, I led with culture. I do want to say financial is important. So you can see the number of culture and workplace strategies that folks are using, particularly things about consistency. So employers can predict their lives. They can be engaged in and feel respected in terms of the organization's decisions. And I wanted to specifically call out one strategy that came up a couple times that was really positively viewed by employees, was offering an internal service navigator. So to just briefly explain, in that case, it's not just saying, here's your benefit package, hope you like it, but actually walking through, providing a dedicated individual that employees can access to walk through, what does this mean for me? How can I maximize what's important to me within the company's existing structure? Great. And then, yeah, financial benefits, just to call out a few, I already mentioned that referral bonuses really surprised me in terms of how much they came up. Just briefly, during the pandemic, there were a lot of hiring bonuses. Those were seen as maybe challenging long-term for the workforce in terms of employees moving around, et cetera. And now they've really focused on retention and referral bonuses. Yeah, there's more I could get into, but keeping an eye on the time, let's move on to key takeaways and opportunities.
Amelia, can you hear me? Maybe before we jump into the takeaways, just any discussion, questions about the preliminary findings? Yes, Paul. Here. Yeah, I think he.
Do you want the dead mic?
That's the mic that's used for alternate representatives, right? So this is such a rich presentation. Thank you so much. I'm assuming that there's no camera on us, right? So it doesn't matter where I'm looking.
This is the camera
right
right
above
here.
you.
I do actually get you now. I don't get everybody, so go ahead.
So I was interested in the unique skills that, the difficult positions to fill and that relationship between entry and skilled labor. I'm with Golden Rule Reentry in Medford. We work with formerly incarcerated people. And we noticed that several of our employers in Southern Oregon say they'll hire anybody because their unique skills are so unique that they want to train people, like for powder coating or protective coating on eyeglasses or something like that. But then they said we don't hire formerly incarcerated people. Oh, well. I don't know if you encountered anything like that statewide. And then I had the second question about employee referral and word of mouth. Sometimes for me translates to cronyism, that they hire somebody that's known by somebody that they work with. So I didn't know if you encountered that. And I'll just stop there so as not to burden you too much with too many questions. Great presentation.
Excellent questions. Happy to just briefly speak to those. So first of all, regarding formerly incarcerated, we didn't really come across in our conversations anyone saying that that was an issue for them internally. Of course, kind of basic safety precautions, things like that. But what we did hear about was kind of challenges where even when folks who were formerly incarcerated were integrated into the company, performing well, that there were sometimes issues where clients were uncomfortable or had discomfort with that then led to, in some cases, the employee not being able to continue with the company. And that was really unfortunate. The employers talked about, as they were saying, like, these are some of the best workers that we have, once they find a place where they feel valued and can contribute. So we didn't have that in particular. And there was talk about wanting to make sure that folks with who had been formerly incarcerated, that once they're kind of trained up and given these opportunities, that they're not then barred from the training they need to advance to the next area due to degree requirements and other things. And then just briefly regarding the word of mouth, that's interesting. I can see how you would wonder that. In this case, this was actually very focused on diverse populations. So in a lot of cases, there'd be like a kind of ethnic subgroup that was kind of populous in the area that the city was in. They would have a couple folks come in, have a good experience, right? And then next thing you know, they have 5 to 10% of their little workforce in this kind of specific ethnic group, that then it was a kind of self-reinforcing process. The company is then adjusting to whatever kind of cultural things or language things they needed to make that group successful. So.
Yeah, like why are so many phlebotomist Tagalog speakers?
That is a great, and we saw that in the healthcare group too.
Yep.
So.
We could add something to that as well. Just to your comment about perceptions, typically speaking, employers who offer employee referral programs have it built in such a way that the employee making the referral does not have any part in the decision-making process as to whether or not that person's hired. So you almost never see the perceptions of cronyism on that level. Once you get into management ranks, then it starts getting a little dicier in terms of the perceptions, but for the most part, yeah, very rarely does the referring employee have any say in the hiring process.
All right, now I think both mics are dying. Any other questions, comments on the findings? I know she's got some really rich takeaways to move into. Okay, super. Go ahead. Thanks, Amelia.
Absolutely. Thank you for the questions. That's one of the things that I'm sad, the most sad about not being in person, is the opportunity to interact more. So, all right, Ronan, next slide. Let's dive in. So, just some kind of key takeaways overall. This first one will probably be one of those yeah ands. This is part and parcel, right? What your consortia, what your organization does, and all we have to say is you haven't scraped the barrel yet. There are still more opportunities, and people are interested in engaging. As I mentioned, manufacturers, Oregon Oregon manufacturing employers are experiencing the most challenges with general professional preparedness and entry-level workers, and the limited pool and challenges training up into the skilled and management positions. As we talked about, there are great program resources, but the location, duration, and specificity of the programs matter. So, in some cases, having the same program, the same information offered 2 weeks full time versus over a semester can be transformative, right? Without necessarily changing the whole game. And as I mentioned, earn, learn opportunities and local. Next slide. Another interesting takeaway was that, sometimes people are hungry for what is this brand new, never before tried opportunity. And that's not really what I heard here. What I heard is there are actually successful, proven programs that are in action right now, whether that's in Oregon, in Washington, in the United States, or internationally, even looking to Europe and some of the other countries, that they think we should be taking a look at to say what could work here. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And as I mentioned, manufacturing employers, they want to continue to engage, continue to be involved. Next slide. Just kind of walking through the opportunities. Generally, of course, opportunities to continue fostering and supporting these opportunities for employers to engage in curriculum and other programs. Next slide. So kind of zooming in on the specific topics, I just kind of cherry picked a couple that I thought would be ripe to kind of walk through in this context. So just know there's more that will be coming in the report, but one that came out was related to demand planning. So I talked about how employers have a formula. They know I need X inputs to get X outputs, but with COVID and with the generational changes, with so many other things, those variables are different. Pieces of those equation have changed. And in some cases, they know how that changed. And in other cases, they're not really sure whether it's going to go back or this is the new normal or what. And so specifically, that's things like lead time standards. I bring that up related to workforce because you have to sequence your resources with your workers. So when that timeline gets thrown off, that impacts your workforce management strategy. But then most specifically, some of the workforce behavior and preferences, that was one that came up across the board in terms of employers just wanting to understand, what is the new normal? What should I just accept as the way things are now, whether or not that works well for me or not? So particularly like what types of benefits are attractive to workers? What types of job features, whether that's more work-life balance, pay, benefits, those 401ks aren't necessarily singing to some of the young generation the way that they used to. Also, particularly utilization of leave. That was a really interesting one in terms of employers just saying, okay, I didn't used to have to account for the fact that every employee I have would use all the leave I grant them. Usually I'd pay them back and that worked out fine for me, but what can I expect now? And then, moving on to the next one, I can zoom back in on those if anybody is wanting to dive a little deeper. So next, yep, perfect. So related to recruitment, these first two, very related. Opportunities that the state can be really effective include supporting, improving the perception of manufacturing careers to potential employees, and also Oregon's overall reputation as a attractive, affordable location for both businesses and employees. So that involved both businesses deciding where they wanted to locate, as well as trying to attract out-of-state workers, particularly those skilled positions. And I did want to clarify that, that's not just, we hear this a lot. I'm based in Portland, so I can make this joke that, it's a Portland problem, but we actually heard that this was kind of the entire state. So, in one case, a business shared how even their rural production in Kansas versus Oregon was a tough sell, and something they had to account for. So just wanted to clarify that. Two other brief opportunities we've touched on. As I mentioned, there's really great regional work happening, regional and statewide work happening to do more detailed skill mapping of some of those more amorphous positions and skill sets. And folks wanted to take that, combine it, again, not reinvent the wheel, and see what kind of further delineation of that there could be. And then finally, supporting review and potential consideration of changes insofar as is practical to Oregon's trade certification requirements. So again, that electrician piece for recruitment and increasing the ability to recruit from out of state. Great, next slide.
Yeah.
So
Amelia? Go ahead.
That last point, the number 4 that you talked about, the electricians in particular, that's a licensed trade.
Yeah.
So, and you would think that'd be a licensed trade across the nation, but we have several states that don't require licensing of electrical personnel at all. And I know in Oregon in particular, it's very tightly controlled and regulated, and we don't allow reciprocity to other states, even if they are licensed as well. So I'm just kind of curious, and we looked at this on the workforce board, and we looked at licensing, but I don't think that's ever going to change. I think you can go from one to the other, but not only in one direction. It will never go backwards.
And it's out of state.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, Florida is a good example. We have a client that needs 50 electricians in Florida. It's totally unlicensed. So in which case we can now pull from all 50 states to fill those needs, where Oregon is restricted to mostly Idaho and Washington when it comes to reciprocity. If we could offer more reciprocity, I think that could be beneficial. But again, I think it's kind of restricted when it comes to that. So I'm just kind of curious what most employers will do is if you're based solely for electrical personnel, you move production to another state. And I think that's going to be an Oregon challenge going forward because, and you see that as a common denominator, especially for electrical personnel. And you can look at some of the building that's going on for Amazon and now some of the data centers that are coming to the state. They can't bring people in from out of state. So it's going to be a constant challenge for Oregon.
And it's not limited to manufacturing, right?
Oh, absolutely. No.
And I think it's the 1-to-1 ratio. That's one of the biggest challenges. Like if there would be flexibility around a 2-to-1, particularly in rural areas where in Lake County, south of us, there's one journey level electrician in the entire county. And that county is bigger than Multnomah and Washington put together. So it's tough.
And it's interesting, we had this same conversation last week in the healthcare consortium meeting around the challenge about reciprocity, but also the some of the requirements in terms of
Regulation is good. It's just balance.
Yeah.
Where's
Yeah.
Well, I think you can look at it from the employer's perspective, but I think you also forget the employee's perspective. Somebody that moves to our state that no longer is employable and is forced into finding a temporary job until they're able to bring up their credentials to the level where they can be employed in the trade that they spent probably the rest of their, the majority of their life focusing on. And so I think we focus too much on the employer need and not enough on how much it's affecting the employees coming into the state too.
Thanks for bringing that. Okay, Amelia, go ahead. Oh,
I was the man back there.
oh, back to you.
Excellent. Yeah. So sounds like you guys are very familiar with this challenge. So yeah, moving on, I'll just hit the last couple and then I want to, get any more discussion we can. So education and training, we talked about standalone, as promoting existing and new resources for regional employers to collaborate. We talked about exposure to manufacturing skills in and early, if possible, in elementary school. Acceptance criteria for degree-based programs, particularly for non-traditional candidates. Training approaches and equipment. This was a really interesting opportunity that was talked about is what opportunities are there to create kind of stepping stone training equipment. So the example they used was training on a smaller forklift, which is friendly for people, you know, sometimes women who are a little bit smaller, but also can just be helpful as an entry point. Yeah, supporting more opportunities for cross-training. Next slide. And then just specifically focusing in terms of topics, we've already covered these pretty extensively, but one to just highlight that we haven't touched on as much is this idea of, I love, this was a phrasing I stole from one of my focus group participants, pragmatic finance. So that's both profit and loss statements, company finance information, but also life planning. So, you know, that's fine if you do value immediate salary realization over retirement benefits, but let's make sure you've done the math. Great. Moving on, career pathways. So again, encouraging more in K-12. And this was an interesting one, is that folks were talking about how, yeah, we want to provide pathways once you step into our organization so you know where to go. But that really shouldn't be the first time you're asking that question. Ideally, the conversation about pathways and what your training and your career is going to starts earlier, right? Could that be in school? Could that be earlier? Another opportunity was helping provide models for companies, resources in terms of helping them reduce the burden of developing those internal career pathways, especially for small companies. Bridge positions, so whether that's the opportunity to designate team leads instead of supervisors, so you have more interim advancement. And then, of course, mentorship programs, which are particularly impactful for some of the priority population folks, to make sure they both see that they're represented in the workforce and have someone to directly work with in some cases. Next slide, last one, retention. So helping employers identify, fund, and provide a really comprehensive type of employee support. So not necessarily providing everything, but more ability to meet some of those kind of key life needs that cause people to drop out of the workforce that have nothing to do with their skill or ability to be successful in the job. So cost of living, childcare, family needs, et cetera. Increasing the availability and promotion of education for how to operate effectively and safely in multicultural environments. And then, of course, supporting research to help employers identify the most meaningful benefits, going back to that generational workforce change piece. With that, next slide, that is all I have for you right now. And I know we are right at time, so I'll open up for any last questions, and I'm happy to stick around for the conversation.
Thank you, Amelia. Inspect for the moment. Would love to engage in a couple of questions or comments about the findings and opportunities in particular, and how they relate to our work. I see Janelle with a half hand.
Hi, yes, thank you for that. It's really interesting research. And, you know, we have a lot of the structures already in Oregon, but I don't think we always have the system of supporting that. Our career technical education in both K-12 and community colleges are a perfect place for employers to engage. Work-based learning experiences are one of those ways to get word of mouth to populations that traditionally might not have entered manufacturing. And I think, you know, a lot of states, employers take a very active role in the K-12 and community college education system. And I don't think we've quite taken on that role in Oregon in the same way that other states have taken advantage of that.
Other questions, comments? Kristen?
I'm just wondering, are we going to reverse this research and looking at from the millennials and Gen Zs who are choosing not to go into manufacturing? Because as I heard some of those things from the employers, those were things that we hear of detracting from going into it. Some of the, the big things for the benefits are the time off, right? The me time doesn't work for that generation because they feel like they can't take the time. They get, that there's part of that's like, oh, I can't take that time because it's me time. If I ask for it, I'll not have my job. Those kinds of things that from that generation, which are so different. And there's a lot of generational studies going on to compare the two of what we're doing as employers and educators to detract.
So
I think maybe what I heard you asking is, would we also be exploring the employee voice?
Right. To compare, but,
Yeah.
or potential employees. Yeah, the potential employees, where are they going? Because there is a generation that's graduating, but they're not taking those jobs and they're not finding those jobs. And so how are we connecting the employees with the employers? Because I mean, there is a generation out there who want jobs and they're voicing something different than what perhaps the generations that came before them are voicing.
So that's something for the consortium to consider.
At the risk of dropping a pebble in the pond when we're supposed to be on to the next topic, I didn't hear anything about artificial intelligence. Are any of the employers talking about that?
yeah, so just briefly, I mean, there's on the production side, there was definitely, of course, the conversation about increasing computerization of systems, increasing efficiency, sometime pursuing efficiency increases over staffing up. But as far as from a workforce standpoint, I was interested that most still reported screening applications by hand. There are some that are doing some kind of high level screening, but at the end of the day, we didn't hear a lot about people talking about like softwares or things like that.
Go ahead, Ken, you can start talking.
Well, and this is kind of pertinent to Dr. Lima's question, but is the SEEK doing any benchmarking? Because quite honestly, over the 30 some odd years that I've been in employment and in the workforce world, I've seen a shift. I've seen education, especially K through 12, talking more and more about CTEs in the school systems, and there's more talk of pursuing something other than a 4-year or even a 2-year education, and going into these trades. But I don't know if there's a true trend unless we are truly benchmarking some of this stuff. And that's the challenge. I know enrollments are down, but that also could be, well, not in all colleges. I'll agree with that. I'm certain, and especially not all community colleges, but they did drop in the last year. A lot of that was pandemic driven, but there was a trend still. And so I think there is an evaluation on education and the return on investment when it comes to education from a student's perspective. I also starting to see, and more so in other states, Oregon's kind of challenged by the way we do apprenticeship training and on-the-job training through employers. But we are making progress on that. We especially in the Hillsborough School District, there's a step towards that, and I think there's a good example. We're seeing it in non-registered apprenticeships in some of the other local school districts as well. But until we really benchmark some of this, I don't know if we're making any progress or not. It's all anecdotal to me. But I think that's one way to know if we're making a dent in some of these challenges by benchmarking it.
It's such a great point, and I think as you all are thinking about next steps for the consortium and working group and topics or projects that you might dive into, one of the things that I've heard you talk about quite a bit over the last year and a half is this idea of supply and demand forecasting. What do we know about the supply on the educational program side? Who is enrolling? What does enrollment look like? How are we moving through those college and credential pathways? And then what do we know about the demand side? And the demand planning pieces of this work were really interesting to me, and I think particularly across all three sectors, we're gonna have some really rich information about how employers are forecasting demand, what are the sort of levers that influence that, and I was really interested in this question of how the state can support employers in demand planning. But I think something for this group to think about is that you uniquely sit in a place where you are considering both supply and demand in workforce, and thinking about skill pathways, career ladders, as well as credentialing. And that may be something that this group wants to dig into a little bit more in the manufacturing space, and maybe in a, starting with a very particular occupation pathway or something like that. But I'm gonna let Nick follow up with you all on those types of projects. I do wanna keep us moving. I know there's a lot to dive into and dig into here, and when we get to the end of our time together today, we will have some time for discussion about what are some things we can pick up from here and run with. Why don't I have Amy and Heather and Ed move to the front of the room? I'm gonna give Ed the hot mic. And I think, is Josh online?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Put Josh right in the middle of us.
Please do grab coffee and refreshments. And really looking forward to hearing from the regional partners. Join me in thanking Amelia as we make the transition. Thank you so much, Amelia, for your work.
You're so welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you all. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person again, but I will stick around. I'm going to turn off my camera, but I'll stick around for the conversation. So look forward to hearing the dialogue.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have an opportunity today to hear from Amy, Josh, and Heather on some of the partnerships they've been developing. And what we're gonna do is just offer them an opportunity to each speak for a couple of moments, talk about your organization, some of the partnerships you're working on, some lessons learned for this group. I've got a couple of questions and then we'll just open it up. So Amy, do you mind starting? And then we'll go Heather and then Josh online.
Hey, Josh.
Good morning.
So a bit about my organization and how we're engaged in workforce and talent development. So I'm Amy Ward. As I said earlier, I'm the Redmond Campus Director. I'm also the interim program manager for our manufacturing technology program, which focuses on machining, CNC machining, and welding. We have had some turnover in the program with leadership in the last decade or so. And we're entering a new phase of stability and renewal or revitalization. And I'm happy to talk more about that in detail, but I will say that with the pandemic and staff turnover, maintaining relationships with our industry partners and our advisory board members has been an institutional challenge. And so we've really been working to renew those relationships, to restart a lot of them. And we do a fair amount of engagement throughout the year, trying to connect with employer partners, site visits. They reach out to us as well. And then we also have our advisory board meeting twice a year coming up. And if anyone would like to join us, I think it's on October 21st. I'll pass it to Heather.
Oh, great. So I'm Heather Ficht, and I have about 25 years' experience in workforce development. I started as a social worker, and I ended up getting hired by a homeless youth serving organization in Portland Metro called New Avenues for Youth, because I knew homeless youth, not because I knew workforce. And that's when the light bulb went off for me. And I get up every day to interrupt generational poverty. And doing this work, workforce development, my friend Bridget always says, what does workforce mean? It just means people. So I'm in the people business, and I believe in a state so reliant on income tax, we should all be motivated to increase everyone's salaries in this state so that we have general fund to do cool things like Future Ready, right? So anybody who talks to me for more than 5 minutes knows that I think that the sun rises and sets out of workforce development, because there is not a topic that you could name that I can't make a dotted line to workforce development. And what is so amazing about living in this region, so my area is actually the Columbia Gorge, the 3 frontier counties just below that, Central Oregon and Klamath and Lake. And this is the most partnerific area I've ever worked in my life. I love it here. And it's great because it's a wonderful fit, because I believe that workforce development is a team sport. No one of us is going to solve it alone. And what's really great is that I get to work with Josh every day. I get to work with Amy and the whole team at COCC, Brandy, and I see Cindy here. So it's really a wonderful opportunity because no one of us can do it alone. In Oregon, there's an executive order that does not allow workforce development boards to do direct service. And that's so that we're neutral and that I don't have a dog in the fight as far as who delivers the training. The employer, the job seeker, they get say in that. So we only withhold about 18 to 20% of our resources to do the coordination. When I started here 9 years ago in 2015, our budget was about 2.6 million, came from one funding source. And in the last 9 years, we're up about to roughly 8 million. And again, we only withhold about 18%. So all of those resources are going to pay for services to people, because that's the workforce, right? So I can't wait to talk about some of our initiatives, but I am going to pass it to Josh Lagallo.
Thanks, Heather. It's always not easy to follow you. Anyways, I'm Josh Lagallo. I manage COIC's Youth Compass program. So I'm the employment and training manager for COIC's youth program. We provide wraparound services in all 3 counties, Deschutes, Crook, and Jefferson County, for 16 to 24-year-olds. I guess what I want to say is that it's how we deliver our youth program isn't just unique per county, it's actually unique per program site. How we deliver programming in La Pine is uniquely different to how we deliver in Bend, per Prineville, per Redmond, and per Madras and Warm Springs. And what I have to offer and being on this panel is all of that it revolves around partnerships and the time and effort it takes to build strong partnerships in a rural community and in a rural setting. It takes time, it takes trust, it takes success stories, it takes adaptability, a program that can be nimble and shift quickly to meet partner needs. I feel like that's all I have so far.
Thanks, Josh. So we wanted each of you to comment first on, from your standpoints in trying to build these partnerships among community-based organizations, employers, higher education, et cetera, K-12, what should this statewide consortium focus on from where you sit? What should the priorities be? And Josh, since we ended with you, let's start with you and then we'll go back around.
Sure. I think a focus should be to continually incentivize breaking down silos. I've been doing this for quite some time, and you have to revisit partnerships often due to staff turnover, new program design, and we get kind of wrapped up in our own world and how we're delivering programs. And it's easy to kind of run programs side by side with other youth programs, other employment and training entities, and to kind of get stuck in our silos. An example would be the definition of work ready. Who's doing work ready for 16 to 18-year-olds? Who's doing work ready for 20 to 24-year-olds? What is work ready? What does that look like? Because at times in partnership meetings, oh, we're taking care of that piece. Oh, we're taking care of that piece too. Well, isn't there some redundancy there? So I think having statewide support to continue to incentivize breaking down those silos, whether that's funding, whether that's more local community meetings of getting strong partners together to show what those incentives are. But that's how you kind of instill the trust piece. Success stories. Yes, we ran a robust small engine repair course with COCC. It was a win-win. It helped kind of reinforce their recruitment, but then at the same time, we had funding to donate as well. I'm not sure if I totally answer the question of what the state can do, but I just want to like highlight incentivizing, breaking down all the silos, especially in a rural community.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I heard really clearly is policy around policy. So the workforce here isn't completely different than it is in Coos Bay or completely different than it is, you know, in the North Coast. It's just not, right? And the needs are not wildly different. And that's really, I think, Amelia talked about, it's not the sexy new thing. It's, can we just have some grit in this state and continue to fund things that work? I don't understand why we're always chasing the new thing, because guess what? We know what works. I just heard Amelia say that all the manufacturing employers in the state agree on one thing. We want employability skills. Guess how you get that? You get that by funding schools. You get that by continuing to fund Oregon Youth Employment Program. The best job training program for a kid is a job. We know, research shows that when a young person has an internship or works before they complete secondary education, statistically, they are more likely to complete high school, matriculate to post-secondary, and have higher lifelong earnings. What? This is not rocket science, folks. Fund the stuff that works. That's all we have to do. Keep at it. We need grit and we need consistency over time. Stop looking for the new thing and fund the things that are. I have a brilliant colleague who talks about if workforce training is the vehicle that can get you to employment and it's a bike, and all you care about is the whistles and bells that go on the bike, you're gonna have a bunch of whistles and bells sitting on the side of the road with no bike. Can we fund the bike? Let's fund the bike.
Well, I totally agree with that. I think Amelia also had a really interesting concept about K through 12 education. And when we are introducing students to our manufacturing technology program, I'll ask, do you know what a CNC machine is? Do you understand what it is to be a machinist? And there's a lot of visual representations in our culture about welding. People know what welders look like, what they do. You see the sparks flying. You don't see a lot of visual representations about what it is to be a quality assurance specialist, or to operate a manual machine, a manual lathe or mill, or to program a CNC machine. And you also don't understand what kind of family level wages there are for those jobs. And so having more exposure for younger students in just what possibilities exist and what career pathways might be out there, I think would be really beneficial to give students of all backgrounds a better concept of what kinds of opportunities there are out there in higher education that are not the traditional transfer model of schooling.
All right, so starting with Heather and then Amy and then Josh, low-income communities, priority populations, what are some of the things you're doing specifically to focus on those groups?
Well, I know Jennifer wanted me to talk about this, but you can never shut me up about it, so it wasn't a hard sell. And I think you'll appreciate this one, Paul. So I'm going to speak a little bit about our, we were funded through the Oregon Workforce Partnership by the US Department of Labor, as well as a Future Ready grant to expand what started in my region around citing WorkSource Oregon centers inside the dozen prisons that we have that are run by the state of Oregon. So just north of here in Madras is the first state prison to get a WorkSource reentry program implemented there. Fortunately, COCC had already kind of started there for many, many years, and I'm not going to steal your thunder on that one. But really, this is about creating opportunity. It's a talent pipeline that's currently underutilized. It's also meeting an employer need, but it's also creating safer communities, and it's going to reduce recidivism over time. Research also says, I don't just pull this stuff out of my ear. There's actual research, right? Research shows that rapid attachment to meaningful employment is one of the key factors in reducing recidivism nationally. So the sooner we can wrap around someone before they're actually released from their institution and get them into a position to have a self-sustaining wage, they're not going to be burdens on systems. They're not going to be part of a homeless population. They're going to be contributing members in the community. Again, more general fund right there, right? So we actually have done job fairs and employer interviews. So there is Brightwood in Culver. It's a window and door manufacturer. And they actually went into the institution and interviewed people and made job offers pre-release for folks that were going to be returning to that community. It's a big deal. And I don't know about you, but if you haven't been around technology in 10 years, I can't imagine what it's like to be a returning citizen. What do you mean? Everything's on this little tiny thing and I don't know how to use it. And that's how I'm supposed to apply for a job. I can't even read it, right? So that's one example. So returning citizens, but we also have another amazing award that happened through Future Ready is COIC, Josh's organization, received a Future Ready grant to create the first mobile WorkSource unit in the state. And it's going around and actually working with some of our frontier residents. So Central Oregon is a vast place, as you know, you've driven in. And so we don't have a WorkSource center in La Pine. We don't have a WorkSource center in Prineville. We don't have a bricks and mortar place in Madras because COC is expanding. So we need to move. And so we need ways to actually reach our frontier communities. And that's another thing that COCC is doing. I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. I think this is an area where COCC really shines in supporting priority populations. And we see that. I'll talk broadly about the college as a whole, and then I can also talk a little bit more specifically about what our program is doing. We have job fairs pretty regularly on every campus. We have a very robust scholarship application process that is a pretty simple effort for a student to apply. We granting out or providing about $2 million in scholarships every year. We have a food pantry, clothing connection, counseling and advising. We have a representative from our STEP program here who will help connect students with resources in the community for childcare, housing, income assistance, all sorts of resources. We have a lot available for students to make sure that they have the support they need to be successful. And that's a big part of the college's long-term goal of being student ready. It's not about the students being ready for college. It's about us being ready for the students that are arriving here ready to learn. In the manufacturing program itself, we bring in a panel of employers every term that we have our orientation class to talk about what they're looking for in employability skills, to talk about career planning and long-term thinking. We've got a gentleman who's been working for 25 years and started out on the floor and now is Director of Innovation. And he describes a pathway that I hope any student in that room can see in themselves as well. So really trying to demonstrate what availability is out there. And then the other really cool thing we're doing is we're partnering with our Adult Basic Skills program for our introductory machining students with an integrated education training, IET, thank you.
So many acronyms, right? Yeah.
And so that is an instructor that is embedded with the class. So she is learning about dimensions, tolerances, measuring, understanding what sort of foundational mathematics skills are required of our students to be successful out in the workforce, and then providing a study group for free for any student that wants to come, whether they're enrolled in that program, in that particular class or not, so that they have the resources they need to be successful and move forward in their education.
Josh?
CYC's program, we are the recipient of the WIOA 1B funding. So our programs are designed to serve priority populations and youth with multiple barriers. Strong partnerships with the school districts, for example, in Bend, in Redmond, and in Redmond, Bend, Redmond, Prineville, and Lapine. We're a dropout recovery program that is relied on by the school district as an alternative school site. I would say a heavy percentage of youth that are referred to those program sites are low income. Some of them are experiencing homelessness, houselessness, low math and reading scores, foster care. All of these are barriers to education and employment. And these program sites are unique to each partnership there. I think a lot of our programming that we develop is designed to assist this demographic of youth, whether that's just them getting their GED and diploma, but primarily the stepping stone of like getting them to an employment and training piece, whether that's through the college. I definitely think there's a pretty strong shift away from traditional four-year degrees and kind of like moving youth into opportunities for trade schools, certificate programs that directly lead to employment.
Can I add a brag? I'm gonna add a brag on Josh here. So the other thing I think that's really cool about COIC's program is they often use earning money and work experience or internship on a crew where you're learning teamwork, all of those employability skills as a developmental first step to engage young people. Because you really need to meet the kids where they are, and a paycheck can speak to them or a stipend, but also they're learning what it is to be on a team. And Josh is really humble about this, but they do really, really incredible work. They have contracts with, BLM and different entities like that to go do really hard trail maintenance and those kinds of things. So they're really create these steps of different levels of workforce engagement programming that's work-based. That's really cool. You were humble about that, Josh, so I had to brag.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate it.
Okay, last question from me, and then we're going to open it up to you all. What can the consortium do to support more employer-based training based on the work you do? And anybody can jump in first.
I mean, I'll go. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but fund these programs that are already working. We have multiple levels of kind of pre-apprentice to actual industry recognized certificate programs that kind of help these young people kind of boost them into actual working and earning a livable wage. But we need the funding to kind of prop up these programs. I would also say it's really important not just to listen to what the employers are looking for, but to engage young adults and what's going to work for them and kind of incentivize them into choosing a career path.
I agree with my brilliant colleague, Josh. I want to give a couple examples of ways that we're working to engage. So I gave the example of the Culver employer who's a manufacturer. I also want to talk about the youth employment program funding that we get through the state of Oregon. We were able to leverage that to work with the High Desert ESD to create internships at Keith's Walking Floor in Madras. So Keith's Walking Floor is a really cool manufacturing setting where young people got internships over the summer to learn about what it is to do those jobs. Because as Amy pointed out, kids only know the jobs that they see: teacher, doctor, firefighter. Like, they don't know that. TikTok. Exactly. And so the more we can create those opportunities, and I know that ODE also has waivers. If you have a career technical education program of study and you have a minor in that program, there is a waiver that those kids can go and do work-based learning on a job site if they're in a program of study, so that they're safe, right, to be on that job. So I know those exist. I also want to point out that we offer, and local boards can do this across the state, we're allowed to spend a percentage of our dislocated worker funding on incumbent worker training. So we have a rolling employee advancement grant, and I'm going to give you an example of Tofurkey, the tofu turkey manufacturer in the Gorge. They're in Hood River, and they got an employee advancement grant from us to create a dual lingual program. So they were teaching supervisors Spanish and they were teaching English to some of the folks that were working in the manufacturing setting. And they created this really shared language that was around specifically that manufacturing setting, just to ensure safety, basic safety and communication. And so that's an example of that. And then the other thing I wanted to just throw out there is another thing, this is an example of being partnerific, is we have the Business Response Network that we've launched here in Central Oregon, which is a partnership where it started with Central Oregon Community College, Economic Development of Central Oregon, and East Cascade Works. And we have pulled in all of our WorkSource partners. We've pulled in chambers of commerce. We've pulled in, and when I say WorkSource, I mean vocational rehab. I mean Oregon Employment Department. I mean our Title I-B providers. And we meet and talk about what are the industry needs so that each of us aren't going and knocking on industry's door and saying, hi, I'm government, I'm here to help, right? Because it's not helpful. So our first foray into this really in partnership is we're working on the non-credit side with John Graham, the Bend area manager, Don, and I are actually doing visits to all of the 5 major bioscience companies in our area because they're all going to be expanding. And so we're talking about creating a customized training program to meet their needs. Manufacture, right? So again, I just really encourage locally is where the rubber hits the road. And I think there is value and importance of a statewide solution. But unless we have funding to actually do the work at the local level, you just got a bunch of whistles and bells sitting on the side of the road, right? So I would love to see, and I would beg you to be active this legislative session in advocating, and I'm sorry, doing education and outreach with the legislature around resources for this really important work. And I highly encourage you to fund local consortia to deliver, because y'all are here today and we love that you're here today. You're not gonna be here next week, next month, and next year, but guess what? We are, and we're gonna stick to it, so.
Maybe you do want
I don't have anything to add to that, which is, I agree with Heather.
Okay. Questions from the group? Please.
Yeah, I don't know if I need the mic.
Why don't you talk and let's see.
Okay, I'll speak loudly because I think, there's a couple of things that I do want to highlight that also, is impacting sort of the pathways that we're talking about. So we talk a lot about K-12, moving into, community colleges, and I want Brandy to spend a minute talking about the pre-apprenticeship program that we did in Lapine that was hugely successful. Like just the model of what we need to be doing. But I also want to highlight that we have a lot of adults coming back into the workforce. And COCC, as well as other colleges, got some future ready funding to do credit for prior learning. And that credit for prior learning is really a recognition that learning can happen in other settings and that we're willing to provide crosswalks from that learning into our credits. So Amy can talk a little bit about a particular person we had last fall, spring that had some work experience and that we were able to crosswalk into some credits so they could earn their certificate and didn't have to spend another term working on that kind of thing. We have a huge number of veterans at COCC. We got like 14% of our population are veterans. And a lot of those individuals bring in military credit that we can crosswalk into some of our certificates and degrees. We have a lot of work to do, but there's some real processes and ways that we can incentivize adults to come back into the workforce because we know based on research nationally that they will take many, many more credits than they probably need because they get back in and start taking some of those skills. So something that we really want to talk about in terms of building pathways in are a little different for adults than they might be for K-12, but still really important in how we think about designing those pathways for students. But I want to put Brandy on the spot and have her talk a little bit about the pre-apprenticeship you did in Lapine.
Okay. Yeah, so COCC developed a construction pre-apprenticeship program. It's in its second year currently, and it was built on the non-credit side of the college. And through partnership with Central Oregon Builders Association and East Cascade Works, they donated a truck and trailer for us to be able to take that pre-apprenticeship out into the more rural areas of our region. Part of that, the first cohort was actually with COIC and Josh's youth in Bend. And then the second cohort that we were able to launch of that program was in Lapine in partnership with Lapine High School. So seniors from Lapine High graduated on Thursday and on Monday they started pre-apprenticeship. And they were able to get hands-on building experience with several different trades through a Habitat for Humanity partnership. The Lapine and South County community really came together. We had a lot of industry partners who came and did guest speaking and had us out for site visits. And it was our first cohort of the program that was a 100% success rate also.
Wow.
And so we had folks go directly into registered apprenticeship from there, into the carpenter's apprenticeship. We had one student enroll into the automotive program for fall term, 2 students who enrolled into the welding program for fall term. So a lot of really great success from being able to take those programs out into the community. That program also partners a lot with our high school programs in the region. We partner with the ESD, and there's a handful of high schools in the Central Oregon region who offer pre-apprenticeship construction, pre-apprenticeship, but we're able to sort of do a little bit of gap filling with that mobile unit to those schools who either don't have very robust CTE programs or don't have the capacity to offer pre-apprenticeship to those participants. And I think something that was mentioned that I just wanted to highlight and Ken, to your point also of the early exposure, it really does make a huge difference. Those are the moments that we see those light bulbs and that motivation to pursue, if it's certificate or degree or whatever technical skills needed for those career pathways. But once we get them out in the field, and I think that in construction, because apprenticeship has existed in the structure that it is for quite some time in the state of Oregon and doesn't quite exist in the same way in the manufacturing industry, that infrastructure for exposure doesn't exist in the same ways. And Ken and Carly, I had the opportunity to work with both of you through Impact Northwest's manufacturing pre-apprenticeship program and pathways to manufacturing. And the on-site exposure is huge. So I think as much as we can promote that within industry around the state, even though it might not result in a direct hire from those students that we're bringing now, the fact that they're able to come out and see what a clean room manufacturing environment looks like, and sort of break down those barriers of understanding of what does a career in manufacturing look like? And so, yeah, sorry, also rambled.
Can I just add though, if anybody wants to see Brandy in action or that work source unit in action, please come to Working Together because Brandy and our work source mobile unit are both gonna be highlighted down in the exhibit hall in October.
Is that a paid, apprenticeship?
The pre-apprenticeship, it's not always, East Cascade Works has been an incredible partner, and has offered stipend wages, and built
When we
internship
have them, we
around,
do it.
yeah.
Okay, but it's enrolled students at the college.
Yeah, and up until, so this term is actually the first term that we're offering it as a credit program, because it does seem that there is interest in pursuing credentials and certificates and degrees aligned to that as well. So historically, it's been non-credit, but they've been enrolled as non-credit students, and then paid with those stipends. But we now have a career foundation certificate.
Do you have any of the employers paying into the system? Or-
Not yet.
We're working on it.
We're working on it, yeah. Yeah. And then we're building out a manufacturing pre-apprenticeship this year as well through the Future Ready
You
org.
know, this is just a suggestion because we're working with
Yeah.
different programs that are both paid and unpaid, or at least saying that. That paid component, I think there's a fairness value to that because the student's actually going out and benefiting an employer to some degree, especially if there is any hands-on work being performed in that. A lot of times, you know, the pay, employers are afraid of it because they want something for nothing, quite honestly. And so then you go to a stipend to get around some of the pay range debates or issues, which again seems counterintuitive to me. And I appreciate the fact that you're able to get students to actually pay to be in a program, to then go out to work for somebody and not get paid for it. If I look at that holistically from above, I go, that's kind of broken to some degree because somebody is getting a benefit from the work being performed by these people going out. So there should be some payment in that. Because I can promise you a contractor is not giving a discount to a client because a student is doing work on that.
And we've been lucky in that we've had a grant funding that has made it a free program for students to access. So they're not paying to take the course and oftentimes they are being paid to take it.
But you're right, it's not consistently funded in reception.
No, and to me, for a program, I agree with you. Success rate is a big deal and having students want to go into it. I think it becomes a bigger sell when all of a sudden you get some money for it.
Yeah.
So we're out of time, and I don't want to stand between you all and your lunch. That's I think the key here. But I just, because we keep continue to battle mics here, Josh, did you hear all that?
I did, yeah.
Okay, good lesson.
Can I ask
yeah, go ahead.
just a question? Because this conversation and thinking about some of the focus group findings earlier really has me thinking about the successful transitions to employment. So we heard from employers missing employability skills. We heard a bit about success in terms of workplace culture being a challenge and an opportunity to explore for retention. We're talking about on the job opportunities as a way of introducing to the workplace, but now we're talking about some of the barriers to that. I'm just curious from our panelists or others around the room, we talk a lot about supports for individuals in education or transitioning to education. Appreciate the conversation about pathways for adult learners. Are we also thinking about supporting individuals as they transition to the workplace or within the workplace? And I know Jonah Centro talks a lot about the role of the CBO in that, but it's a question and an observation simultaneously, maybe for the panelists first.
I thought you were just gonna pass it.
I was tempted. I think that that is an area of opportunity for probably the college as a whole and definitely for the manufacturing technology program. And as we continue to rebuild our relationships with employers, I think we'll be able to provide more assistance with placements. And then we could also bring in things like resume writing workshops and dry runs of job interviews and things like that. We have heard the employability skills, demand. I ask every employer what they're looking for, and it's always some version of employability skills, but they use different words. So we are really changing and adjusting our program to fold a lot of that in the beginning, but I think there is an opportunity for how we connect students with opportunities as they complete their certificates and degrees.
Right.
And then, I do think our credit for prior learning will help with that as well. And that's a great way for a student who's already worked over the summer or has owned their own fabrication business or has past experience in the workforce to save $400 and get 4 additional credits on their transcript.
I would just say that's also the role of WorkSource. So we have a $350 million system in this state that is funded through 5 state agencies and our resource that can give supportive services, payments and things like that. OJT, on the job training. So you've got close to the skills, but you're a good cultural fit, but you're just not quite having all the skills. So I would definitely promote WorkSource. And then also in Josh's employment program, they support young people with those same kinds of wraparound supports. Again, it's needs-based and it's limited resource, right? So, and our public system, WorkSource, is almost exclusively federally funded. So Oregon wants to see some shifts there. Let's get investing. I kind of wanted to tag though onto something that Ken was talking about earlier, and I would like to just challenge our industry employers. It's really difficult to get a manufacturer to leave their manufacturing setting for anything ever. And I get it. But that is a big challenge in kind of creating these consortia solutions, because I understand the ideal is everybody gets the training they want on their site and it's free. That's just not realistic. We aren't resourced in that way, particularly in rural areas. We have to do things together. It's just that we have to get those economies of scale. So I would just challenge businesses to engage with the college, engage with WorkSource, engage with all these partners that want to help and can. And frankly, Amy's done a really incredible job. I've been invited to at least a half dozen different of these employer engagement events. So just engage.
You know, you had mentioned chambers, and that's the first time I've actually heard workforce talk about chambers, quite honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
work with our chamber
when I go to other states, there's the other states' workforce boards are usually made up of somebody from the chambers.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And, you know, they sit on the board.
We
and-
have
I
that.
have that, yeah. I
Okay.
do.
Yeah, our
Yeah.
Frontier Chamber was on our board and that was
And your
the
chair.
first. Yeah, the first Frontier Chamber of Commerce, and it served 3 counties, just north of us.
And I appreciate it. I've been the chair of the Beaverton Chamber of Commerce, and I can tell you, we had nobody from WorkSource on our board, and most of the members did not understand what WorkSource or WorkSource Oregon, Workforce, Work Systems Inc. who did, had no clue. And so there's I don't want to understand it because I've got my way that works, and that's sad, quite honestly, because if you're an employer not engaging in that system, you're missing out on an opportunity. But there's a lot of negative Nancy, and I don't disparage Nancy's because I know a lot of really
There's some
positive
good Nancy's out
too.
there.
But no, there are a lot of positive, there are a lot of negative, and one negative comment can affect a lot of other people.
Yeah, I'll just add from the university side, as we worked on semiconductors, which has been a big issue, given all of the federal attention around that. One of the biggest challenges we have in formulating curriculum to support that is actually having industry willing to come in and be specific
Right.
about what their needs are. And we have stood up staff and divisions to do this, but we can't get beyond that first meeting.
Right.
To actually engage in, okay, how do we design this? And we can move faster than we have in the past. So if there's a way we can figure out as a consortium to tackle that problem, it sounds like it's all the way up through the higher education side, K-12 through university. Josh, I didn't give you a chance to comment. Did you want to say anything in response to some of this conversation?
I just wanted to add in a successful transition to employment. It just doesn't happen at that rate without support services. And support services can mean mentoring and coaching, or it can be covering a young person's car insurance for a month to get them started. The support service is integral. It's vital for that smooth transition to successful employment.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. So
Okay,
we
thank
are
you.
gonna transition to a break. Join me in thanking our panelists, Josh. And our fearless moderator, Ed. And we do have some box lunches out front. Let's go ahead and take 10 minutes. So we can be back at 11:35. Grab a lunch so we can eat during the next portion and then be ready to go on our tour. For folks who are joining us online, we are very close to a quorum. We're just missing 2 people. So if you are able to stay on and join us after the break, we're gonna try and get a couple more folks to log in so that we can vote on our couple of agenda items. So be back at 11:35. Thank you.
I do appreciate the opportunity for good conversation, and we'll be able to continue that as we move into the facility tour at the end of our agenda, but I do want us to keep moving to our next agenda item. We do not quite have a quorum, so we're gonna keep moving into our next agenda item, where you're gonna hear from Ronan. Please continue to enjoy your lunch. Come and go from refreshments if you need to refill coffee or water. But Ronan is gonna walk us through the next set of slides, which are in your packet, and introduce y'all to a body of work that was assigned to the consortium through House Bill 3306. And Ronan and team have been doing some work behind the scenes to prepare for you all to dive into this bucket of work. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ronan. I'm assured we have 2 working microphones now.
I believe you do. Yes, all right. So I'm gonna be up here, so I can go through my slides and talk at the same time. For reintroduction, my name is Ronan Simon Bray. I'm the administrative specialist with the Future Ready team. I'm also the I'm also the Industry Consortium public administrator for all 3 consortia. And today I'm just gonna walk through some legislation that was passed last year that has impacted the legislatively mandated duties of each industry consortia. So I'm really gonna cover 4 topics. I'm gonna try and go fast because I'm on a tight schedule. First, I'm gonna go over sort of the legislative background of this bill and some key definitions that were identified by myself and other staff as sort of crucial implementation. Next, I'm gonna go into a high-level overview of some federal and state economic methodology as it relates to satisfying the requirements of that legislation. Then I'm gonna go into how we've actually used that methodology to sort of compile initial wage data sets for this bill, and then at the end, we'll have time for discussion and next steps. And I should say as well, quickly interject with any questions at any time. Really, what we're looking for out of this presentation is sort of a process check. So how have we understood the requirements of the legislation? How have we gone about sort of pursuing and satisfying these requirements? And what is your feedback as it relates to sort of those 2 topics? So a bit of legislative context. As I'm sure you all know, in 2022, Senate Bill 1545, also known as Future Ready Oregon, was passed, which established each of these industry consortia in statute. Between April and August of last year, we launched the work of each of these consortia. And right around that time, this bill, House Bill 1506, passed, which altered the duties of the industry consortia as specified in Senate Bill 1545. And since about December of last year, I've been working with the former Manufacturing Consortium strategist, Dr. Carrie Wackel-Delplain, in research and implementation of this bill. And we had sort of arrived at what we felt was, a first step, both in understanding the requirements and sort of going about meeting those requirements as well. So what does the bill actually say? So House Bill 3306, for again, some additional context, when this was passed or when this was first introduced to the state legislature, it was entirely focused on wage and reporting requirements for participants in paid earn and learn programs through Future Ready Oregon and a variety of other workforce programs. Subsequent amendments sort of removed those requirements, but added this additional piece for each industry consortia to establish wage rate standards varied by locality for each skilled occupation within the manufacturing, healthcare, and technology industry sectors. Once every 2 years, each consortium shall recalculate wage rate standards using relevant economic and employment data made available by the Employment Department, and B, submit a statement to the Commission summarizing the methodology used to recalculate those wage rate standards and the date on which located. So what stood out to me and Dr. Carrie Wackel-Delplain immediately were these two terms, locality, skilled occupation. There's no definition provided in either this bill or Senate Bill 1545 for what these mean. And so sort of implementation really depended on having robust understandings of these two terms. So first, skilled occupation. Again, undefined in statute, but through consultations with staff at the Bureau of Labor Industries, hereafter referred to as BOLI, and the Oregon Employment Department, hereafter referred to as OED. We essentially narrowed it down to two possible understandings. The first is a really strictly apprenticeship focus. So I'm not going to read this definition here, but basically to provide some of the reasons why we might use this, there is a theoretical qualitative advantage. There are around 950 occupations federally that are classified as apprenticeable. So that's a lot. But we found this other term called high skill occupations, specifically coming from OED. And this was formulated in coordination with the non-local workforce boards, the Workforce and Talent Development Board, the HEC, I believe ODE as well. So under this interpretation, a high skill occupation is defined as an occupation with a typical educational level, either for entry or post-secondary training, or occupations with an apprenticeship as the typical on-the-job training level, or occupations typically needing related work experience or long-term on-the-job training for entry and post-secondary training or above as competitive. So the reason there's a number of reasons why we're kind of leaning towards this term right now. First, there was some pretty significant legislative testimony offered by Representative Paul Holby, who's one of the sponsors of this bill, that sort of indicated that this legislation was meant to fill a gap in sort of workforce training, wage transparency that is offered through sort of federal apprenticeship code, but is not offered through workforce opportunities that are outside of that. Additionally, there are, I believe, let me check through real quick. I think around 484 occupations that are classified under this high skill definition. And again, leaning towards this as opposed to a strictly apprenticeship view, one, because of these sort of broad workforce development goals of Future Ready Oregon as a whole, and quite the theoretical quantitative advantage of using that apprenticeship definition. Within Oregon itself, there are the apprenticeship opportunities are significantly more limited, and there are significantly more limited sort of apprenticeshable occupations available that we can get data for, as opposed to using this definition, if that makes sense. So this next term, locality, this actually has been defined, again, not in Senate Bill 1545 or House Bill 3306, but in pre-existing statute, generally in reference to prevailing wage rates for municipal occupations and public works projects. I will note as a disclaimer that none of the wage data that we have compiled thus far has been mapped onto any sort of regional breakdown. So again, this is sort of just to provide you all with some options of how we could go about mapping wage data onto the state. So in this first breakdown, this is what this looks like. This is probably sort of like mid-level detail, but there are a number of alternate breakdowns that we could apply in this case, such as local workforce development board regions, economic development districts, and minimum wage regions. And so each of those kind of gets from the more specific to the more broad in terms of like disaggregation of data across the state. And here's what each of those looks like. So just for reference, local workforce development board regions, economic development districts, and minimum wage regions. This is the kind of most high we can get. However, as this piece of legislation mandates that this consortium use data available from the employment department, we are likely to use the employment department's existing geographic breakdowns for initial mapping of wage data across the state. This doesn't mean that in the future we couldn't map this wage data onto other sorts of regional breakdowns. This is kind of just the first step again. And OED wage information for reference is published at the state workforce area and the sub workforce area levels. So to reflect the fact again, that this project, this body of work has been one of compilation of existing bodies of research and methodologies. It's just an overview sort of some of the major state and federal sources that we have used in sort of going into our implementation of this bill. So the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS for short, the Standard Occupation Classification System, or SOX for short, and the Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Program, OEWS for short, and that's a lot of acronyms, are all these federal sort of data gathering resources that are providing us with sort of our parameters for what is an industry sector and what are occupations that are found within each of those industry sectors. The actual wage information itself is coming from OED. And then the actual wage data on high skill, high demand, high wage occupations is also coming from OED. And then various locality and apprenticeship definitions and industry sector definitions are coming from Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Oregon Employment Department, and the Oregon Bureau of Labor Industries. And we obtained some sort of key information, guiding information from a couple of staff that I want to shout out. Jason Payton, who's an occupational economist at the Oregon Employment Department, and Stacy Rogers, who's an apprenticeship expert at ECC. So getting into the methodology, I'm going to try and keep it at a very high level. How does OED produce these wage estimates? So all of OED's wage data comes from this federal program that is run by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Program. This is a program that in Oregon, I think samples about 18,000 businesses across a variety of NAICS designated industry sectors over, I think, a period of 3 years. So the actual wage data that we're going to get is based off of these surveys, and a series of these surveys in the past 5 years. How does OED define an occupation? So under the Bureau of Labor Statistics Standard Occupation Classification System, or SOX, which is aligned, OED generally aligns their sort of definitions and practices with Bureau of Labor Statistics. And occupation is defined as a grouping of a number of similar individual jobs. I will note, just for like reference when we actually get to look at the data, although that's not going to be this meeting, there are a number of nuances which this doesn't really capture. For instance, we'll have X number of welders employed in an industry. That's not going to capture, for instance, how many years they've been employed in that industry, their level of experience, etc. So there's a lot of sort of nuances that this definition sort of misses. So that's just important to keep in mind as we move through this process as well. Moving on to sort of broader industry sector definitions, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics uses the North American Industry Classification System, NAICS system for short, which groups businesses or establishments into specific industries based on their economic activities and similarities in their production processes and revenue data. In general, OED and BLS assign certain occupations to a NAICS designated industry if 25% or more of that occupation's employment is concentrated in that industry. And just for a disclaimer, this is not like a sort of statistical cutoff, it's sort of arbitrary. It's one that legislators have asked for in the past, and it's just sort of their standard procedure here. I will note about NAICS codes, although this isn't necessarily going to apply to all occupations, that there are many industries, for example, which conduct multiple economic activities and have revenue that is sort of even, if not almost evenly split between sort of similar, but according to NAICS, different economic activities. So a good example of this would be like paper manufacturers who also make their own pulp. So if you have, for example, a pulp manufacturer who's getting 55% of their revenue from pulp manufacturing and 45% from like actual paper production, under the NAICS system, that industry is going to get classified as a pulp manufacturer. So again, that's not going to matter so much in terms of the actual occupations that we're going to see. But again, just something to keep in mind about this methodology as we move through this process. For reference, I'm not going to read all these out loud, but these are the sort of high level NAICS designated industries that OED and BLS use in their analysis of the manufacturing sector. So we could get into some, it gets very specific in terms of the actual NAICS codes themselves. So 3 digits is sort of the most broad you can get, more spread of that sort of specific industry variation. So for example, under food manufacturing, right, we could go even deeper and get into like tortilla and bakers manufacturing, which is included in there. Questions?
So why did they choose the NAICS coding system as opposed to the SIC coding system, which is more workforce based?
That's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that one, but I would be happy to follow up with our OED on that. I'll get back to you on that one. And could you remind me, what is the SIC?
Yeah, you know, it's something that would be utilized for workers' comp.
Yes.
So it's more defined to the job that the person is doing as opposed to the company's title. Because you can take my company, for example, as basic as staffing, there's a code for, under the SIC code, there's gonna be one for temporary staffing company, and then there would be one for employment, which is more used for like a headhunter or and we do both of those type of functions. Or you can take our steel fabrication where it's more of a fab shop variety where we also do some production there. So, you know, it can be more defined than this category would normally be.
Yeah, got it. So what I will say in that regard is I think we have the room to sort of take that into account further down the line. As the legislation specifies, and I'll just, if I can go back really quick. So the legislation sort of calls on us to initially use this relevant economic employment data made available by the employment department, but also says that there is no such data available, the consortium shall recalculate the wage rate standards using relevant economic employment data made available from other resources as identified by the commission. So that's the Higher Education Planning Commission by rule. So that's a process that we haven't really got into yet, like what that looks like. But I think I would just say like there is some room for us to take that into consideration, or at least include that as part of this initial set of like published wage estimates, which again, like we're not really there yet. We're kind of just at a first step in terms of understanding what the requirements is, what the requirements are, and what the various methodologies are that we can use to satisfy these requirements. So that's be something that I'm sure we could take into account in the future.
Yeah, and I wish I knew what the acronym stood for, but it is SIC.
Standard Industry Classification.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions?
See any food or beverage on that, this manufacturing?
Let's see.
It's in food processing somewhere, but I don't remember where it is.
Yeah, I know it's in there. I don't have the code off the top of my head. I
It is included,
apologize,
that's
but,
fine.
and I do know it's in there. I was just looking at it earlier today. And this is a quick disclaimer. There are some occupations that you will see that are not classified as high skill, and this is actually particularly prevalent in the manufacturing sector, unfortunately. Despite having registered apprenticeship opportunities available in Oregon. And so initially, this may seem to run counter to one of these methods of classifying an occupation as high skill, which is that it has a typical on-the-job training level, of apprenticeship. And in short, some occupations will require an apprenticeship to be certified, others do not. So while an apprenticeship opportunity may be available or even encouraged for certain occupations, it's not a requirement. OED is not necessarily going to classify that occupation as high skill. From the consultations that I've had with some OED staff, it also appears, there's significant lag time between the sort of apprenticeship standards that are updated and the data that is gathered in this occupational employment and wage statistics program survey. So again, just to keep in mind as a sort of caveat call out for the future. And now sort of moving on to considerations and limitations, there's a number of sort of, again, nuances, questions that these might, hoping these questions may help sort of jog discussion. So firstly, will the wage scales for apprentice-level occupations be set by the wage estimates available through OED or by using the determined rates from wholly or the local membership committee, as oftentimes there's a difference there. There are a number of occupations which are classified as high skill, which are generic, or in other words, they are found across multiple mixed designated industry sectors, and are not necessarily specific to a single industry. Whereas there are a number of occupations which are specific to a certain industry sector, but are not considered high skill. And so one of the things that we have to figure out is, are we going to include both or one or the other? Another question, what happens if wage estimates decrease since the previous times these rates were established? And will we allow wages to fall below a certain level, or is there going to be a hard floor over time? Additionally, and this is sort of unfortunate on many levels, OED does not possess what is a sort of standard like entry level wage. So we have data for the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles for high skill occupations in each of these sectors. But again, OED is essentially not able to provide us any guidance on which of these sort of constitutes entry level. So for us, will entry level be considered the wage rate standard in terms of the legislative requirements? Will this include a wage progression schedule? And then additionally, will we attempt to adjust, amend, or update this data in between the quote unquote determination years? So in terms of some broader questions for discussion, I can go back and to see those previous questions as well. In terms of the landscape of occupational wage data, where are there gaps? How can this work, collaborate, or align with existing wage data efforts? What other people, groups, organizations would find this data helpful? And then our plan really for the next quarterly meeting, and we're hoping for some additional input from you all on this, is to bring specific manufacturing occupations and their related wage data with any regional breakdowns that we can find to essentially present that to you all as a means of sort of condensing, distilling, because I think there's around, I want to say like 350 occupations that are considered by OED to be within the manufacturing sector. And that's sort of a lot to take in at one time. So yeah, there are specific manufacturing occupations and associated wage data we would like to see presented at Consortium's next quarterly meeting. That can be jobs too, and we can match that job to the appropriate occupation classification as well. So discussion, questions, yeah.
I guess I didn't understand that bit about whether we will allow wages to fall, right? So we're. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding a whole lot here, but I think what we're tasked with is figuring out what the wages are for these classifications in the regions, right? And sort of saying what we, and then it's an advertising tool for people that wanna go through various workplace training programs. That's a way to say, here's what you could earn as a welder in this type of factory. Is that correct? And then, I guess, could you elaborate upon what that question, would we allow the wages to fall? I mean, if the sort of, I don't want to say prevailing, because that's a loaded term, but if the normal or typical wage for an occupation in the region does go down, why wouldn't we want to reflect that reality?
Well, again, I think, so you talked in that first bit about this being sort of an advertising tool. And that's totally the way that we could run with this. The legislation doesn't really, it's very vague in that part as to how we use this.
It's not a regulatory tool though, right?
No, it just says publish wage rate standards for skilled occupations in each of these sectors. So how we want to go about doing that and using that is sort of up to the consortium, I would say, and I'm looking at Jennifer for affirmations here.
Right, I think, maybe a different way to phrase that question is, would there be any scenario where we would want to revisit the wage standard in between the every 2-year requirement? Because your point, Arthur, is totally appropriate. Like, we established the wage rate. We don't establish, we publish the wage rate. And then we would need to do that every 2 years. We will need to figure out which occupations we want to include, how we want to think about region and locality. And then I think it's reasonable for us to think, is there any circumstance that would drive us to revisit in between?
Isn't it, also could be used as a tool to narrow down the area of where we're gonna focus on. So if we're looking at living wage jobs, we're gonna decide what a living wage level is and look at the jobs at that rate and above and focus on those particular areas, as opposed to maybe the ones that fall below living wage. Or I guess you could do the other way as well and try to lift the bottom up as well, but that could be another.
I think that would be one tool for you all to consider. I totally agree, and I think there's an opportunity to look at the intersect between career laddering, wages associated with the occupations, and then the associated degree or credential pathways as sort of part of this work. They all become pieces of information to inform where you focus.
I would hope if we're gonna focus on living wage, that we would encourage the employment department to change their definition of high wage. Like if high wage is not a living wage, then maybe it should not be published. 'Cause I know our CTE rely on the employment department's definition, and some other states have moved more of a living wage look at that. I mean, there's nothing magical about, they just picked that definition. They can change their definition of a high wage as well. So I would hope if we're gonna look at living wage, we would encourage the employment department to also change their definition.
The workforce board did a pretty in-depth study on that and actually produced some information so that it, I think is more realistic living wage. We didn't use the word living wage, and I cannot think of exactly.
I think sustainable. wage.
Yeah, I think so. But wasn't high wage just a percentile within the occupation, right?
Yeah, it's above the average.
Is a high wage.
But it can be pretty low in some areas.
Well, sure. A high wage in the hospitality industry is not the same thing as a high wage in the manufacturing.
Yeah. So is the high wage definition sector specific?
No.
Well, it's based on the data from the sectors, so.
Occupation.
Occupation specific. Yeah.
How do we impact entry wages against living wages?
What do you mean?
So we may set the tone on what we want that high wage to be, or that living wage to be. And then the sector's entry jobs don't pay, those low wages at entry, how do we impact that? Because there's a big community that's get left out and taking those entry jobs, that then we would have to look at how do we create those pathways into those living wages. And we're investing all this money to create people prepared to take on those living wages, but we have to take them into the low wages or entry wages.
Yeah, just my experience with dealing with all the different employers that I've dealt with over time, the entry level positions are much more willing to train. They say, give me somebody that I can work with and I'll train them up and get them up to speed. You get up to a certain level and they go, you better have the experience or I'm not paying you. You know, it's like, no, this is the level I want and I expect. But at the lower level, they'll go, I will train somebody and skill them up. But so from my perspective, let the employers do what they do best and focus on the, you know, the one level up, because well, you look at it in an overall picture, it's just too much of a scope, I think.
Right.
And you have limited dollars, so you have to really focus on how can you be most efficient with those dollars, and I think, you know, you have to be able to narrow that whole view.
And you can imagine this is such a body of work across all three sectors. The intention for our Q4 meetings was for Ronan to introduce the obligation of the consortium and to talk about the work that we've been doing as staff to sort of build the bucket. And then we'll come back to this at the start of 2025 to sort of start to think about, are there specific manufacturing occupations that the consortium would like to focus on? I can't even remember how many occupations there are, but there's just too much volume to do the whole thing initially right out of the gate. So how do we want to focus the work? There's some research related questions that I think we need some guidance on from you all.
I don't remember who it was, but in one of the early meetings, there was a woman who gave a presentation on job trends in Oregon. She was looking at different sectors and showing what had grown and what had shrunk. That kind of data would be really useful for us to know, and also trends in jobs like, I remember early on, someone was talking about the shift from fixing equipment to fixing the robots that operate the equipment, and how that is a career pathway. So that kind of trend would be really useful. And then in Southern Oregon, the growth curve. So where should be looking 5 or 10 years for the jobs to be, would be what we'd be interested in. Just looking through my really tiny lens of formerly incarcerated people, job readiness in Southern Oregon. And that's what we'd like to know.
I see. So like to inform the sort of wage data we're gonna see, like getting that context of what the.
Right, like which, yeah, and, you know, just off the top of my head, food preparation, manufacturing tiny houses, manufacturing furniture, powder coating seems to be big in Southern Oregon. Those are a few of the industries that we're seeing business growth, where we're looking to get, and fabrication, metal fabrication. That's where we're looking to get jobs for our people.
All right, thank you so much. We're gonna have to keep moving. Thank you, Ronan, for introducing us, and I love the initial conversation. There will be more to talk about. Ronan, a couple of folks have messaged that they were able to join the meeting. Can you confirm how many people we have online?
Yeah.
Okay, 7, all right, we are still short, so I'm gonna go ahead and move us to the next agenda item, and then we have, Okay, I do just want to wrap us up with a couple of things on medium-term objectives, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Anne Marie Hamlin, who is here on behalf of, the community college. Go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. So, we've been talking about your medium-term objectives focused on policy and funding recommendations to address manufacturing workforce gaps and opportunities. Much of what we've been doing is identifying tools that are in your toolbox for informing priorities. We will be looking to stand up working groups, which we talked about in the update to the charter and how we might strategize for that work. And then identifying and establishing some success metrics for you all to point to, both in terms of the manufacturing workforce and in terms of the collective impact of the consortium itself. Next slide. Thank you. This is just an illustration. We looked at this last time, this idea that we're learning together, we're planning with principals, and then acting on emerging priorities. Next slide, please. One of the outcomes of our learning was the work the funding work group did to inform the priorities for the next round of Workforce Ready grant funding. Some of the principles that we apply to our work are that we're data informed, that we're leaning into emerging opportunities that are identified by the consortium or by industry, and that we're thinking about ways that the consortium as a statewide body can add a unique lens or value to an issue. This is a unique body that brings together education, industry, and community partners to think about the workforce ecosystem and gaps and opportunities. What's a unique lens that you all bring? We also heard a bit about that iterative process of being informed by regional partnerships and where the state plays a unique role and where regional consortium or regional partnerships are the implementation arm of that equation. And then aligning with the governor's priorities, we heard a couple of times today around the semiconductor work. There is a clean tech task force that the technology consortium is considering, but there's certainly some overlap with manufacturing there. And I think about the fact that my brain just went blank. We are all human beings. So just thinking about the governor's priorities and how we're responsive to that, particularly when it comes to healthcare, manufacturing, and technology, and informing sector-specific strategies. And then acting on emerging priorities, being informed by ongoing employer engagement and learning from Future Ready Oregon funded projects and partnerships. Next slide, please. I'm gonna skip this and move to the next slide. So today we really focused on building our toolbox around employer engagement through the work of the focus groups and the focus group findings, continuing to learn from Future Ready Oregon investments and other partners and partnerships that are happening in this space. And as you all start to think about what are those emerging priorities that you'd like to focus on for 2025, we're really gonna build on that in your Q1 meeting, which I think next slide says we don't have time for discussion. Slide says to watch for the 2025 meeting calendar. So we will be we'll be publishing that meeting calendar. A reminder that Q1, the winter meeting, will be a fully virtual meeting. But really be thinking about what does publishing wage rates mean? How does that intersect with career pathways and credential pathways, and where are the opportunities that with a statewide lens and the lens of education, industry, and community, we can be thinking about applying that.
You expect those wage rates to remain
advisory, or do you see a regulatory?
There is nothing in the legislation that implies a regulatory. It really is
Not a
to
threshold to qualify for
inform.
program.
No, there is a component of that House Bill 3306 that does apply to earn and learn grant making. But that is sort of separate from, it is intended to be an informed. Yeah. All right. Ed, Jonah, are we ready to turn it over to Emery? Is there anything else that you would like to say?
I think we're on a cost, I think this is pretty significant, very significant today and hearing these data, and I think, we have a lot of work to do, and I think the input's gonna be pretty amazing, so. Let's get on.
Get on.
Yeah, so I'm gonna introduce, it's a lot. I'm gonna introduce Anne Marie, and then, that's gonna shepherd us into an opportunity for a tour, so welcome, thanks for.
Look at the front of the room, so it's easier for you. You don't have to crane your necks. Good to be with you. I'm sorry I couldn't be here for the entire morning, but I know that I will hear all about it from my team. I'm really excited that you have chosen to come to Central Oregon for this consortium meeting, and that this work is getting off the ground in the way it has. I think it's so important to be thinking about the future of manufacturing in Oregon specifically. And I wanted to comment on Future Ready Oregon, which of course has more arms than just the manufacturing. It's been such a good initiative for our state, for our colleges, for our workforce. And I'm so pleased to see it continuing in the ways that it has, including with this consortium. I know you already heard from our program director today, and I think that what I have to say may not overlap too much. Forgive me if it does, a little bit. But I just wanted to say a little bit about COCC and what we're doing, what we're working on. We are in the middle of reimagining our own manufacturing program. And we're very excited about that. Amy Ward, our director of the program, is helping to lead that work. And we're thinking in a couple of ways. We're calling that the manufacturing revitalization. That's both a curricular revitalization and a physical revitalization. So you'll have a tour, an optional tour here in a few minutes. I hope in a few years you will come back and meet here again so that you can see the after post-construction that we have going on. We have an $8 million remodeling project that will start happening in the next year. And so we're very excited about that. Our program has already been working on curricular changes that are informed by our advisory board and research that they are doing among other schools in the state. So we really have put a lot of energy into that. In fact, workforce development is one of our strategic plan goals, and a specific action project for that goal is the manufacturing revitalization program. So we are thrilled to be a part of this work. And we've got some wonderful leadership taking it where it needs to go. Amy has in particular led some of the connections that she is making with our community, with the industry partners. And that's a really important aspect of our work, that we are connected with our industry partners, that we be responsive to them. And we will certainly get quite a bit of information from our industry partners through our advisory boards, but through these other relationships and connections too. We want to stay on top of making this program really meet the needs of industry and the workforce in our region. We're also very engaged in something I know from having read your draft charge that you all are also thinking about, and that's diversifying the workforce in manufacturing. And so there's a lot of thought and effort going into that work as well as part of this revitalization. And then finally, building a workforce for our local residents of high wage, high demand jobs. And here I think of the work that we're doing from creating pathways from high school through training, through getting jobs and apprenticeships with our pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs.
So we're really sort of thinking this whole thing in terms of its bigger picture, and again, excited that we get to work with all of you as part of that. We do face challenges. I'm sure you all are familiar with some of these. I'll just mention three. It's always a challenge for us to hire well-qualified faculty to teach these courses when they can make more in industry. The deans and I spent some time last year reworking our salary placement, which has especially benefited CTE faculty, and I'm hoping that that will provide some improvement in our ability to hire well-qualified people. It's a placement system that I'm proud to say now really honors the years of experience that one might bring to this role, not simply the education, but the experience. Another challenge, of course, is the cost of equipment, the cost of the remodeling effort. It's pegged at $8 million right now, but we all know what happens with these things. And so that plus the populating of the building with the equipment that we need is another challenge that we'll face. And we're continuing to work with our grant writers and looking for opportunities for that, partnerships as well. And then finally, something I think you've already talked about a little bit this morning, but is communication. Communication with our local partners, with our state partners. And I'm so pleased that this work through the consortium will certainly facilitate improved communication overall in that area. So I hope you see, we also have an energy for this work that's really gaining ground, gaining traction right now. So I'm so happy that we're part of it. The work of the consortium exemplifies this energy. That energy gets picked up on by our faculty and our students when they know this kind of thing is happening. And we are so excited and ready to collaborate with all of you and the rest of the state. So thank you again for being here, for spending the time on our campus. I hope you'll enjoy the optional tour. And again, I want you to come back in a few years for the second round of the optional tour. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber. We're really looking forward to seeing the facility, and I just wanna wrap up again by saying how great it is to be in Central Oregon and to get to see other programs and hear about partnerships that are happening across the state. It really does increase our collective learning and looking for connections. I failed earlier to introduce, Nick introduced himself, but we also have Shauna Tice and Maggie Forey, who are our new technology consortium strategists and healthcare consortium strategists, respectfully. Really excited to have this team on board. They are each exceptional in and of themselves, but as a team, I'm thrilled about the capacity, energy, and skills that they're gonna bring to the work of the three consortiums. So looking forward to what 2025 will bring and the planning that you all will embark on in early in the new year. With that, Amy, should we give folks like a 5-minute personal needs break and then maybe just meet right here in the lobby at 12:40? Okay, 12:40. Thank you to everyone online, and we appreciate everyone's participation today.